Hi guys. Tonight we drift backward through time into the kind of cold that makes the air sting your teeth. You wake to endless white. The storm has swallowed the world, and the cabin's fire, your one promise of warmth, has coughed its last ember. Wind presses against the walls like a living thing, a low growl you feel through the floorboards. The room smells of wool and smoke, but both are fading. You're wrapped in every blanket you own, and still, your toes ache like they've turned to glass. You probably wouldn't survive this not without knowing what they knew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always beautiful to see where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. You press your hand to the window frame and feel the cold crawl in. It's not just winter, it's a siege. Out there, somewhere beyond the veil of snow, lies the prairie, the mountains, or the frozen plains of Dakota or Alberta or Siberia, it hardly matters. The frontier always had its storms, its way of humbling those who thought they could tame it. Tonight, you are one of them. The blizzard moves like a white tide, swallowing fences, animals, even paths. Snowflakes drift sideways, each one a tiny mirror catching the moonlight that sometimes flickers between the clouds. The air is so thick it feels solid. Your breath plumes and freezes on your scarf. You close your eyes and try to remember how settlers did it, how they kept children alive when the world turned into an icebox. They didn't always win. That's the first truth. Even the hardiest homesteaders feared the White Death, as some called it. But those who survived left clues, small, quiet ones written in diaries that creaked like their frozen doors. Historians still debate whether survival came down to preparation, luck, or pure stubborn spirit. Maybe it was all three. You imagine a family, let's call them the McCarthys, somewhere in the late 1800s. They've lost their fire. The blizzard has piled snow halfway up the window. The father has been gone since dawn, trying to dig out the oxen. The mother sits with three children under a buffalo robe, whispering stories to keep their jaws from stiffening in silence. The baby's breath fogs her shoulder. Their lamp oil ran out hours ago. Still, she hums. She hums to drown out the wind, that shrieking, ghostly whistle that sounds almost human. It's easy to romanticize this scene, but let's not. The frontier was not quaint, it was cruel. Yet, within that cruelty, there was a strange beauty. When the temperature plunged to negative 30 degrees Celsius, and the air itself seemed to freeze mid-breath, time slowed. People learned to listen to the crackle of ice, the shift of rafters, even the soft hiss of snow crystals rubbing together. Those sounds told them things. They said, "You're still here. You're still alive." Frontier families developed instincts we've long forgotten. They could tell the hour by the shade of blue in the sky. They knew when snow changed from soft powder to icy crust that would cut the skin. You, sitting in your modern comfort, might miss those signals entirely. But to them, these signs were everything, maps drawn in the air. The storm outside roars again, pushing its voice through every seam. You think about the small dark room and realize it's not truly silent. The floorboards creak, the wind whistles, and beneath it all, a steady rhythm. The sound of your own heartbeat, a slow drum in the cold. That's what they held on to, the rhythm of being alive, even when warmth was gone. There's a story from the Dakota Territory, winter of 1887. A settler named Amos Fry described crawling into a haystack with his wife and infant after their wagon overturned. The storm raged for 2 days. They wrapped themselves in horse blankets and dug deeper into the hay. He wrote later, "The sound of her voice was the only thing that proved I had not gone deaf from snow." Historians still wonder if the tale was embellished, but its truth doesn't depend on proof. It captures the essence of what survival meant: sound, touch, and the will to keep them both. You shift, imagining hay scratch against your skin, the faint warmth trapped in the core of a frozen bale. You picture the darkness so complete you can't tell if your eyes are open. No fire, no light, just the awareness of your own breath. It's frightening, and oddly peaceful at once. Many frontier families prepared for these moments, though never perfectly. Some built low dugouts, half-buried homes that used earth as insulation. Others relied on sod walls, so dense that snow stuck rather than seeped through. But in a true whiteout, even the best cabins leaked cold. A gust could steal the last spark from a hearth faster than you could relight it. You'd be left with smoke-stung eyes, frozen fingers, and choices that had no easy answer. Burn furniture? Melt snow in your hands for water? Sing so the children wouldn't hear your teeth chatter? You press your palms together, imagining how they did the same. Skin against skin creates warmth, primitive, human, irreplaceable. Scientists would later call it conductive heat transfer. Settlers simply called it holding on. Out there, the wind shifts, and for a heartbeat, you hear quiet. That's the danger moment, the silence before the next gust, the lull that tricks you into thinking the storm is ending. Frontier journals mention it again and again. The stillness frightened me more than the noise, because silence meant the snow was falling heavier, thicker, blinding even the brave. You can almost feel it settling now, soft and relentless. Your breath fogs the air, tiny clouds fading as quickly as they form. Somewhere in the dark, a child stirs. The mother whispers a lullaby she barely remembers. It's in Scots Gaelic, maybe, or Norwegian, whatever homeland they carried inside. Music, even hummed through cracked lips, was a way to defy the void. Here's a quirky detail you might enjoy. In some regions, settlers rubbed goose fat or bear grease into their faces to prevent frostbite. It worked surprisingly well, though you probably wouldn't want to smell it. And here's the curious debate. Did they learn this from indigenous neighbors or from old European fishing traditions? Historians can't agree, and maybe that uncertainty itself is part of the truth. Survival knowledge didn't belong to one people, it was passed in whispers across cultures, carried like a shared heartbeat. You let that thought rest as the snow thickens again. The storm outside might last all night, but the story doesn't end here. You breathe slowly, letting your heartbeat match the rhythm of the wind. Because this is where endurance begins, not in fire or shelter, but in the quiet choice to keep breathing, one icy breath at a time. You blink awake again, unsure how long you've been sitting in the dim light. The storm still hasn't eased, and the cold has found its way deeper, creeping into your bones. The window panes have turned to white glass. The only sound is the constant sigh of wind as it threads through the cracks. You remember what your grandfather used to say about storms like this? Never trust the quiet sky. It's talking to you in its own way. On the frontier, that saying wasn't poetry, it was survival advice. When families ventured out before a blizzard, they looked to the heavens for signs. The sky had moods. A hard grey sheet meant snow. A faint halo around the moon meant the temperature would plummet by morning. And if the wind changed direction suddenly, that was the universe whispering, "Go home now." You glance upward through the frost, but the world is gone behind a curtain of white. The horizon has disappeared. Out here, you might as well be floating in space. The settlers learned early that the first step to surviving a snowstorm was knowing it was coming. Many didn't. The difference between life and death could be a few misread clouds. Some frontier families carried barometers, fragile instruments brought from the east. Others trusted the smell of the air. A heavy metallic scent meant snow within hours. Some said animals felt it too. Horses would stamp and refuse to drink. Chickens would go silent, and dogs would burrow under wagons. Even now, meteorologists admit animals often sense pressure changes before humans do. Historians still debate how accurate those instincts really were, but it's hard to argue with generations who lived by them. You picture yourself standing outside, coat pulled tight, looking up at that endless sky. The wind tastes sharp, almost electric. You can smell pine, frozen soil, and something faintly sweet, the scent of the storm itself. It's both warning and invitation. You're small beneath it, but you're listening now. In the old journals, settlers often wrote about reading the sky as if it were a living text. They described clouds like great ships, sailing low and heavy, and winds that told fortunes if you had the patience to hear them. One Nebraska farmer in 1885 wrote, "The sky rippled like water, and I knew it would snow before I reached the barn." He was right. Within an hour, his tracks vanished. The ability to interpret the sky wasn't superstition. It was the science of observation. Every hue meant something. A faint pink at dusk meant warmth still lingered. A dull white glare without a clear sun meant snow could begin within minutes. These people didn't have satellites, but they had memory layered, lived in memory passed from parent to child, from trapper to traveler. You step outside in your mind now, boots sinking deep into the powder. The sound of your own movement is soft, rhythmic. Each crunch seems to echo back from invisible walls. The air feels thick, as though the sky has lowered itself to your shoulders. You reach out a hand, catching flakes that vanish before you can count them. There's something peaceful here, but also something ancient, a quiet that feels older than the human voice. Sometimes, settlers ignored the warnings. Overconfidence was a killer on the frontier. There's a story about a man named Elias, a merchant who left Fort Benton in 1869 to fetch supplies before the storm broke. The horizon had already turned the color of pewter, but he insisted it would hold another day. He didn't come back. They found his wagon months later, upright, frozen solid. The reins still looped around his gloved hands. The horses had broken free. No fire, no tracks. Just snow piled against the wheels like time itself had stopped. You exhale, watching the breath plume in the imagined cold. How many made that same mistake, thinking they could outrun the sky? Even today, with radar and forecasts, people still get caught by storms they thought they could beat. The lesson hasn't changed. When the land tells you to stop, you listen. Here's a curious tidbit. Some early settlers claimed they could hear storms approaching days away. They described a faint hum beneath the earth, like the ground was preparing to breathe snow. Scientists now think they might have been hearing low-frequency vibrations caused by pressure changes or faraway thunder. Whatever the truth, those sounds became omens. "When the soil hums, the snow will come," one old Norwegian saying went. Historians still argue whether such sounds were real or imagined, but perhaps imagination itself was a form of survival. Believing you could read the land made you more attentive to it. That attentiveness saved lives. The snow thickens in your mind, layering the world in silence. You picture the family again, huddled in their dark cabin, waiting for dawn. The father knows the signs too well. He saw the halo around the moon last night. He heard the stillness in the forest, the way birds vanished without a call. He had 1 hour of warning, maybe two. It was enough to stack hay against the north wall, to bring the cow inside, to fill every pot with water before the pump froze. Small acts, but in a storm like this, they were everything. You imagine his hands now cracked, numb, fumbling with rope and latch. His breath steams as he glances upward. The snow begins like powder, light as ash. Then it thickens. He shuts the door. That sound, the final thud of wood against wood, is the last human noise before the world becomes white. Inside, the family waits. The wind hits first, shrieking across the roof. Then comes the cold, seeping through every seam. The youngest child asks if the sky will fall. The mother says no, but her eyes flicker toward the ceiling as snow starts to build above it. She has learned that the sky does fall, in its own way, every winter. Outside, the wind sculpts drifts taller than fences. Inside, the air grows heavy with breath and fear. You realize how precise survival had to be, how reading a sky correctly could mean the difference between dawn and oblivion. Even now you can practice that old habit. Step outside before a storm and look up. Feel how the air presses closer, as though the planet itself is inhaling. Listen to the wind's edge, it sharpens before the first flake falls. The frontier families weren't mystics. They were observers, artists of attention. They looked at the same sky you do, only with more at stake. You take another slow breath, letting the imagined cold fill your lungs. The storm isn't over yet, and neither is their night. Somewhere beyond that window, the wind changes again. The family hears it and knows. The heart of the blizzard has only just begun. You sit with the sound of the wind still in your ears. The night has deepened, but you can feel life continuing in the small, fragile spaces within the storm. If the first rule of survival was learning to read the sky, the second was learning to read each other. On the frontier, warmth wasn't always made of wood and flame. It was made of closeness, of shared breath, of trust that no one would give up before the morning. Inside the tiny cabin, every inch of space matters. The McCarthy family you imagined earlier now leans together on a straw mattress covered in a patchwork quilt. Their bodies touch shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. It isn't comfort so much as necessity. The youngest child is pressed between her parents, her hands tucked into the crook of her mother's arm. The smell of damp wool and cold skin fills the air, heavy and strangely intimate. You can almost feel the press of that closeness yourself. In the dark, the world shrinks until it is only the space that can be shared by a few bodies. People who lived through such nights said that silence could drive a person mad if it wasn't broken by the sound of another's breath. Body heat was more than metaphor. It was a resource. Two people huddled together could raise the air temperature between them by several degrees. Whole families learned to arrange themselves like puzzle pieces, letting no warmth escape. A modern physicist might explain it as conserving radiant energy, but they would miss the human part of it, the trust, the pulse you can feel through someone else's back when everything else is frozen still. One diary from a settler in the Wyoming Territory describes sleeping in layers of people. The father on one side, two sons in the middle, mother and baby on the other. They rotated positions through the night so that no one froze on the outer edge for too long. That rotation became almost ritual. It was the choreography of endurance. Historians still argue whether this practice originated from necessity or from older European winter customs, but it likely came from both. Survival doesn't care where a good idea was born. The air inside such a shelter grew heavy, moist and often sour, but it meant life. Condensation gathered on the beams, dripping like slow rain. Blankets stiffened with frost at their edges. Yet there was comfort in that dampness, because it meant the air was warm enough to hold water at all. You think about what it must have sounded like in that room. The creak of the wind outside, the soft rustle of breathing, maybe a low hum from the mother. Songs were a form of warmth too, not for the body, but for the mind. When people sang, even in whispers, they reminded each other they were still human, not ghosts caught in snow. The frontier was full of small tricks like that. A family might heat stones in the last embers of the fire and tuck them under bedding. They might wrap feet in burlap, stuffed with dry grass. They would rub each other's arms with rough cloth to keep blood moving. The smell of lanolin and smoke clung to everything. It was messy and simple, and somehow it worked. Here's a curious bit of history. Some families rubbed their wrists and ankles with bear grease before sleeping. It supposedly trapped heat and repelled frostbite. Modern science says the effect was minimal, but the ritual mattered. It gave them a sense of control when nature had taken everything else, and it probably did protect the skin from cracking in the dry air. Historians still discuss whether such folk remedies were learned from indigenous neighbours or from European folklore brought across the sea. It was probably both, woven together the way survival knowledge often is. The border between wisdom and myth was thin in the cold. You imagine now the air around you growing still, heavy with quiet. The family's breaths rise and fall in unison. Their heartbeat becomes a single pulse. You can almost hear it if you listen long enough. Outside, the storm still shrieks, but it is losing strength. Snow presses against the walls like a living thing. Inside, time has slowed until it feels like a dream. Maybe this is how they endured, by shrinking the world to one warm pocket of humanity and refusing to think beyond it. There are stories of neighbors finding families days after such storms, alive under collapsed roofs, bundled together like cocoons. One rescue account from Minnesota in 1882 describes a mother and 3 children buried in snow for nearly 40 hours. When the rescuers dug through, they found them alive but barely conscious, their faces coated in frost. Their warmth had kept them, the rescuer wrote, the same way the earth keeps a seed until spring. You let that image settle in your mind. A seed beneath snow, waiting. Even now, in the hum of modern heaters and insulated walls, that instinct lingers somewhere deep in you. The human body knows how to save itself when there is nothing left but touch. The McCarthys will survive this night, though they don't know it yet. Their fire is dead, their walls are cold, but they have each other. The mother hums softly, maybe an old hymn she learned as a child. The sound trembles but does not break. The father pulls the edge of the quilt tighter, and the oldest child presses his hand against the log wall, feeling the vibration of the wind beyond it. He listens, because listening is all he can do. The warmth between them is faint, but it's enough. Enough to last until the next sound comes, the faint crack of timber outside, the sigh of shifting snow, the proof that the world beyond the cabin is still moving. You exhale and imagine your breath mixing with theirs. For a moment, it feels as though you are in that room, part of the small circle of life holding against the dark. You can almost smell the wool, the faint salt of sweat, the sweetness of survival. They don't speak of fear anymore. They have folded it into their rhythm, made it part of their breathing. And when morning comes, if it comes, they will say they endured by faith, or by luck, or by God's mercy. But the truth is simpler. They endured by staying close, by holding one another, until the storm ran out of rage. The night has settled into that strange rhythm only storms know. It breathes in gusts and sighs, then holds its breath again, as if the earth itself is thinking. Inside the buried cabin, you hear the faint scrape of snow sliding off the roof, the sigh of the wind shifting its pitch. The family barely moves now. They have entered the quiet patience that comes when there is nothing left to do but wait. Snow is not just snow. To frontier families, it had dialects, textures, and moods. They could tell its meaning by the way it fell or the sound it made underfoot. To them, it was a living element, both friend and enemy. The snow could insulate a home like a soft blanket or crush it with weight if ignored. Knowing which it would be was part of the unspoken language that determined survival. Early settlers often spoke of listening to the snow. It wasn't poetic, it was practical. When the snow creaked like dry wood, the air was cold enough to burn lungs. When it hissed faintly, the flakes were melting slightly as they fell, warning that a crust of ice would soon form. Travelers learned that certain snow could hide streams still running beneath, waiting to swallow boots or hooves whole. Contemporary journals mention a saying, "Powder lies, crust kills." It reminded people that light snow was harmless, but heavy, hard-packed drifts could trap wagons or collapse roofs. Knowing the difference came from years of watching, walking, and listening. A curious little detail from that era is that children were often sent outside during short lulls to speak to the snow. They would press an ear to a drift and report what they heard. Some said it hummed or whispered. Parents used the game to teach them how to sense air changes and to keep fear at bay. Later observers have wondered whether these whispers were the faint vibrations of wind traveling through layers of ice. The question has never been settled completely, but it reveals how deeply people read meaning into every sound. You crouch beside them in imagination, placing your ear against the packed surface. The snow feels alive. It gives slightly beneath your weight, soft yet cold enough to sting your cheek. Beneath the surface, there is a silence so deep it feels like a heartbeat you cannot quite hear. The McCarthys, still huddled in their cabin, know the snow by sound and by smell. It smells faintly of iron and pine resin. The father mutters that it is heavy snow, meaning the flakes are thick and wet. The mother knows that kind will build fast against the door. She tells her oldest boy to keep checking the cracks near the floor, to make sure air can still pass. They cannot open a window, or the wind will pour in like water. In another time, scientists would measure the insulation value of snow and confirm that a thick drift can hold a steady internal temperature near freezing, even when the air outside is far colder. Settlers learned this through experience. When a cabin was buried, it sometimes grew warmer, not colder, because the snow trapped heat from the bodies inside. The danger came when the roof gave way or air grew too stale to breathe. There's a story recorded in a Manitoba diary from 1874 about a family who survived 4 days under snow after their sod house collapsed. They dug small holes through the roof using a broom handle to let air in. When rescuers arrived, the house looked like a white mound with one stick poking out of it. The rescuers said the air inside was damp but warm enough that a candle still burned. Scholars remain divided over whether this tale was exaggerated, but such accounts helped inspire later Arctic explorers to study snow as insulation. You breathe in slowly and picture how it must have felt to live inside a mound of snow, cut off from the world but wrapped in a cocoon of silence. The air thick with breath, the walls glowing faintly from the reflection of buried light. Even fear must have felt muted there, softened by the soundless weight pressing from all sides. Snow could save or destroy, depending on how well one understood its voice. The settlers learned that when snow became hard as stone, it reflected sound differently. A shout could travel far on such nights, echoing like glass. Some families used that quirk to call to distant neighbors during blizzards. They would open a door for a moment and yell a name toward the wind, hoping the frozen air would carry the sound. There are accounts of people shouting greetings across half a mile, their voices oddly clear. Modern physics would call it refraction of sound waves in dense, cold air. At the time, it felt like a miracle. You can imagine the father doing this now. He opens the door a crack and calls once into the dark. His voice disappears instantly. Then, faintly, another call answers back, so distant it might only be the echo of his own. He shuts the door again, but the sound stays with him, proof that someone else, somewhere, is still alive. Inside, the family listens to the snow's rhythm. The flakes patter against the walls, soft as whispered words. The mother says it sounds like a lullaby. The youngest child asks what the song means. The father says it means they will see daylight again if they stay quiet and wait. You can almost feel that patience. It stretches time until it becomes gentle. The storm outside no longer feels like an enemy. It has its own heartbeat, slow and relentless, and all you must do is match it. There is a calmness in that thought. Maybe that is why people remembered these storms with a kind of reverence afterward. In diaries written months later, they spoke of the snow as though it had consciousness. It punished and protected in equal measure. As the night drifts on, the snow keeps falling. The sound changes again, softer now, like ash. The wind has tired itself out. The family feels it too. They breathe easier, though they dare not move. Somewhere under that endless white, life waits in silence, learning again the language of snow. The blizzard keeps breathing outside, but something has changed. The air no longer howls like a living creature. It murmurs. The fury is turning inward now, softening into a quieter kind of danger. Inside the cabin, the family begins to notice the weight of snow pressing down on the roof. A deep, groaning sound travels through the rafters, slow and rhythmic, like the moan of a ship in ice. You tilt your head, listening, because you know that sound means it is time to act. When the wind takes away your fire and the walls start to freeze, survival means making the earth itself your shelter. Frontier families learned this from those who had lived close to the land long before them. Digging into snow was not madness, it was strategy. They called it burrowing, and it saved more lives than any fireplace ever could. The father in your story reaches for a shovel. He cannot risk opening the main door. The drift would collapse inward. Instead, he uses a trapdoor near the floor that opens to the lean-to, the small structure where they keep feed and tools. He begins to dig sideways, each movement slow and careful. The snow resists at first, heavy and wet, but then it becomes lighter, powdery. The air feels colder out there, but fresher too. The family behind him watches, waiting for the signal that the passage is clear. Frontier records describe this method in calm, practical language, as if carving a tunnel through ice were just another daily task. According to pioneer notes from the 1880 seconds, settlers often built snow caves when stranded far from home. A hollowed drift, if shaped right, could trap warmth and block wind better than a tent. In some Arctic regions, similar shelters were crafted by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Later explorers admitted they had borrowed the idea completely. A curious little fact from one expedition journal mentions that people sometimes lined their snow burrows with spruce branches to keep walls from melting from body heat. If branches were scarce, they used dried grass or animal hides. The walls glowed faintly, lit by a tallow candle or a bit of whale oil in a tin cup. The smell of smoke mixed with the scent of pine and snow, creating a perfume that was half comfort, half warning. Researchers today note that snow caves can maintain a steady temperature just below freezing, even when the air outside drops far lower. The warmth of human breath and bodies becomes trapped inside, turning the space into a fragile cocoon. Those early families did not know the science, but they understood the feeling of it. The sudden hush, the still air, the faint sound of snowflakes sliding across the ceiling like sand in an hourglass. You can almost crawl beside them now. Your hands sink into the cold, damp crystals. The snow presses close, and for a moment you feel buried, but then you notice the quiet. It is not the silence of death, but of protection. Every sound is softened, every breath caught and returned. In one account from the Montana frontier, a man trapped in a wagon storm used his own overturned sled as a roof, then packed snow around it until he had made what he called a house of air. He claimed it was warm enough to remove his gloves after an hour. Experts remain uncertain how accurate that story is, but the phrase itself survived. A house of air became a poetic way to describe the strange peace of being held inside the storm rather than fighting it. The McCarthys do something similar now. The father digs, the son scoops snow behind him with a tin bowl, and the mother gathers blankets. They crawl one by one into the hollowed space and sit together, backs against the smooth white wall. The air is cool but still. Outside, the wind has grown faint, its roar now a faraway whisper. Inside, the snow glows faintly with reflected moonlight. The mother rubs her hands together, feeling her fingertips burn as circulation returns. She smiles faintly, whispering that the snow feels alive, as if it is breathing with them. The father says that is because it is holding their heat. He does not know he is describing a form of natural insulation. He only knows that the air feels kind now. A strange little practice mentioned in settler diaries was to press a metal spoon into the wall of a snow shelter. If it frosted quickly, the family knew they needed to open a small vent for air. If it stayed clear, the space was safe. The trick saved many from suffocation when snow sealed too tightly around them. You can almost picture it now, that dull spoon catching faint light, glistening with frost. No one can say exactly where these customs began. Some historians think fur traders learned them from Cree and Inuit teachers. Others believe similar methods came with Scandinavian immigrants who remembered northern winters. The origins blur, as they often do, because survival knowledge does not belong to any one people. It drifts across borders like snow itself. You settle in with the family, feeling the stillness close around you. Time slows again. The children whisper about the sound of the storm outside, now faint as the ocean far away. The father leans his head back, eyes half closed. He knows that movement keeps the body warm, so he flexes his hands and feet every few minutes. The mother hums quietly, keeping rhythm with her breath. In this fragile shelter of packed snow, warmth feels like memory. You think of fire but no longer need it. Your breath clouds the air, hangs there a moment, then disappears into the soft white above you. Outside, the storm sighs one last time. The snow falls steady but tired. Inside, you imagine the family resting, safe in their small hollow, the earth and the sky forming a shield around them. The lesson is quiet but powerful. Sometimes the only way to survive the cold is to let it hold you for a while. The air inside the snow shelter grows still. The storm outside has softened to a whisper, 1,000 tiny flakes drifting without fury. In the dim space, you can hear the rustle of cloth and the faint rhythm of breathing. The McCarthys have learned that the cold will always find a way in, but the right clothing can turn a person into their own shelter. For frontier families, fabric was armor. They did not have the luxury of new coats or imported wool every season. What they wore was often hand-spun, patched and repatched, until it seemed to have more stitches than thread. Yet each layer told a story about human ingenuity and adaptation. Settlers wore linsey-woolsey, a coarse blend of linen and wool that could resist wind better than pure cotton. It itched terribly, but that scratchiness meant density, and density meant warmth. Period records describe how mothers often soaked fabric in animal fat to create a kind of water resistance. The smell of tallow clung to everything, a mix of smoke and salt that settled into every fiber of their lives. One diary from an Illinois settler mentions how people lined their boots with rabbit fur, secured with twine, because socks alone froze solid. The author complained that when she finally took off her shoes, the fur peeled away in one piece, stiff as bark. That image lingers, necessity transforming even discomfort into a kind of craft. A small but fascinating detail from the time is that many pioneers rubbed the insides of their boots with beeswax or pine resin before long journeys. It kept the leather supple and prevented cracks. The method likely came from indigenous guides who had been treating moccasins with similar resins for centuries. Researchers remain unsure who first adapted it for heavy boots, but the technique spread quickly through frontier settlements. Inside the snow shelter, the father adjusts his coat, made of rough buffalo hide lined with scraps of flannel. It is heavy, but the weight comforts him. The mother wears two skirts, one of wool, one of cotton, with a shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders. She has sewn patches so carefully that each piece of fabric tells where their travels have taken them. A corner from an old wagon curtain, a strip of her wedding dress, a bit of feed sack dyed with ash. The children's clothes are mismatched, but they work. The oldest boy's mittens were once part of a blanket. The youngest girl wears sleeves stuffed with hay to block the wind. When they move, the air smells faintly of smoke and damp wool. You can imagine touching that fabric, rough and warm against your palm. Settlers learned early that layers meant life. They wore everything they owned during winter. When a person's body heat met trapped air between layers, that space became a miniature oven. A modern physicist would call it insulation, but the families simply called it smart dressing. They did not care for words like thermodynamics. They cared for whether their children woke up breathing. Some journals mention an odd winter ritual known as greasing up. Families would heat animal fat just enough to soften it, then rub it into the seams of clothes and even into skin. It created a barrier that trapped warmth and moisture. The smell must have been strong, but it worked. One woman wrote, "It kept my fingers from splitting and my cheeks from turning to glass." Later, historians found this practice echoed in seafaring cultures from Scandinavia to Newfoundland. The connection is uncertain, but the logic is the same. When the cold attacks, you make a second skin of what you have. You imagine now how the McCarthys must look in the dim light. Layers upon layers, rough edges, mismatched buttons. Yet in the soft glow of their tallow candle, those clothes become a uniform of endurance. They are not pretty, but they are proof of persistence. Here is a peculiar custom worth noting. When settlers traveled in pairs through snowstorms, they sometimes swapped outer garments halfway through the journey. The reason, according to period accounts, was to share the sweat and prevent any one person's coat from freezing solid. It sounds strange now, but the logic was solid. The person who wore a damp coat risked frostbite when the moisture turned to ice. Alternating prevented that deadly chill. Experts still discuss whether this technique truly worked, but the idea reveals how seriously people studied their own survival. Inside the snow cave, the family sits close. The mother checks the children's sleeves, making sure the fabric hasn't stiffened. The father rubs his hands together and pulls his scarf tighter around his neck. He remembers a neighbor once saying that wool saves souls as well as skin. Maybe he was right. Wool burns slow, holds warmth, and forgives mistakes. You picture your own hands now, feeling the weight of heavy winter fabric. It scratches, yes, but it also comforts. There is a strange intimacy in knowing how many people wore their clothes into battle with the cold. Every patch, every stitch, a declaration of hope. It is easy to forget that what we now call survival gear was once handmade by candlelight. No synthetic fibers, no zippers, only needles, thread, and faith in skill. Some historians believe frontier women were the true engineers of winter endurance, designing garments that could keep whole families alive through months of frost. Their work rarely made it into official records, but the evidence hangs quietly in every surviving coat, every scrap of homespun wool that still carries the scent of smoke after more than a century. The McCarthys begin to relax. The snow walls hold steady, the air stays breathable, and their clothes keep them warm enough to sleep. The youngest child curls up beside her mother, her small hand resting on the patchwork shawl that smells faintly of pine smoke. You close your eyes with them. The storm outside may still whisper across the plains, but inside this small hollow, human fabric holds strong. You feel the texture of it against your skin, and you understand something simple yet eternal. Warmth is not a luxury, it is a craft, one stitched patiently from necessity and love. The hours stretch quietly inside the hollow. The storm outside fades to a whisper, but the air in the small chamber begins to grow thick. You can feel it now, that faint heaviness when breath lingers too long and the walls no longer give back enough air. The McCarthys sense it too. The youngest child yawns and coughs softly. The father knows the danger. It is not the cold that kills first, but the air itself. Settlers who lived through deep winter storms learned that snow shelters could become both protection and trap. When snow sealed too tight, carbon dioxide built up from the warmth of human breath. Without a vent, sleep could turn into stillness that never ended. Period writings record many such warnings. In one Minnesota almanac printed in 1886, a line reads simply, "Air is life. Carve it or lose it." The father begins to scrape a small hole near the roof with the handle of a spoon. The snow resists, packed hard by its own weight, but soon a thin draft touches his face. Cold air rushes in, clean and sharp as glass. It burns his nose at first, then feels like grace. Frontier families called these openings breathing holes. They learned to protect them from closing by hanging a strip of cloth near the opening. If the cloth moved, the air was still flowing. If it hung still, it meant death was near. Later, explorers would adopt the same trick, calling it an air flag. Scientists today recognize this as a simple way to monitor ventilation, but back then it was instinct mixed with trial and error. A curious little detail mentioned in the diary of a trapper from Manitoba tells of people melting snow inside a tin cup to keep air humid enough to breathe comfortably. Dry cold could cause throats to crack and lungs to ache. By letting a little steam fill the shelter, they created a balance. The method was so effective that modern survival manuals still recommend it. You can almost feel the steam now. It curls softly in the dim space, blurring the light of the tallow flame. The family watches the vapor rise and disappear into the white ceiling. The air grows easier to draw, though the temperature dips slightly. Comfort always came with a price out here. The father sits back and closes his eyes. His mind drifts to the stories neighbors used to tell of travelers lost in snow who built fires inside sealed caves and never woke. The soot marks found later told the story. Such tales became warnings passed from settlement to settlement. No matter how cold, never light a large flame inside snow. The smoke suffocates faster than frost. Researchers still debate how many of these cautionary stories were based on real events, but enough people repeated them that they became frontier law. Fire belonged outside, breath belonged in. That was the rule. Inside the small space, the McCarthys rely on another quiet trick. The mother keeps a bit of charcoal wrapped in cloth. She places it near the air hole, believing it cleans the breath. Modern readers might smile at the superstition, but recent studies of activated carbon show that it can absorb some impurities in small spaces. Perhaps the intuition was closer to truth than anyone realized. The air smells faintly of smoke, tallow, and cold metal. It is not pleasant, but it is bearable. You draw a breath with them and feel how heavy it tastes, how alive it feels simply to fill the lungs again. The child asks her father why cold air hurts when you breathe it. He smiles, explaining that it is just the body remembering what warmth feels like. He does not know about moisture loss or thermal shock, but he understands the poetry of the explanation. Sometimes survival requires stories as much as science. In many frontier settlements, elders spoke of the spirit of breath as something sacred. To lose it was to lose one's connection to the land. They would step outside during short breaks in a storm and exhale into the night, watching their breath drift upward, saying it carried prayers to the sky. Ethnographers later found similar customs in various cultures, from the Sami herders of the north to the Navajo families of the American plains. The convergence fascinated researchers, who still discuss whether the idea of holy breath arose independently or spread across migrations. You step into that moment in your mind. Outside the snow shelter, you kneel and breathe into the vast whiteness. The wind snatches your breath and carries it away. It is both humbling and comforting to think that something invisible leaving your mouth might be heard by the storm itself. Back inside, the air steadies. The cloth at the vent flutters gently, proof that the world still moves beyond these walls. The family lies close, their warmth shared, their lungs trading air with the mountain of snow around them. Each breath feels earned, a small victory repeated again and again. A modern scientist would explain that the carbon dioxide they exhale drifts upward through the vent, while heavier cold air seeps in through small cracks below, creating a circulation system by accident. The settlers could not name the process, but they felt its pattern in their bones, the way the air would stir faintly against the cheek, or how the candle flame would tremble just enough to show life. The night deepens. Outside, the stars return, faint behind thin clouds. Inside, there is no light but the soft glow of their tiny flame. The mother hums again, a sound almost too gentle to hear. It fills the air between breaths, keeping rhythm with the storm's fading pulse. Breathing becomes their ritual. In, out, in, out, like the tide of a hidden sea. Each inhale a promise, each exhale a prayer. You match them without meaning to, feeling your own chest rise and fall with theirs. It is strange how something as ordinary as air can become the purest act of endurance. When the candle finally gutters and dies, the family is not afraid. They can feel the air still moving. It smells of snow, of life. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and darkness, they understand what generations before them had already known. Warmth may save the body, but breath keeps the soul alive. The quiet inside the snow cave is almost kind. The walls glimmer faintly in the reflection of the tallow flame, like frozen silk. The McCarthys have survived the first long night, but survival does not end with air and warmth. Hunger comes next. It begins as a whisper in the stomach, then grows into a roar that drowns every other sound. On the frontier, people learned that storms were not only about cold, but about waiting. When a blizzard sealed the doors, food became a kind of memory. You could almost taste what you did not have. For families trapped far from towns, what mattered most was what they had stored before the snow came. Frontier larders were strange hybrids of practicality and hope. They held salted meat, jars of beans, dried apples, and the thick, dark syrup settlers called blackstrap. Some families made hardtack, a biscuit so dry it could outlive a person. Others relied on cornmeal mixed with melted snow to make a thin porridge. It had almost no taste, but it was enough to keep the body moving. According to agricultural journals from the 1870s, pioneers were advised to pack barrels of flour and sugar before winter and to hide a smaller supply in case the main store froze solid. In storms that lasted more than 3 days, families often had to choose between rationing carefully and eating everything at once to keep up their strength. A peculiar detail noted in a settler's letter from Nebraska tells how people sometimes boiled snow mixed with molasses and ashes. It sounds awful, but the mixture provided minerals and a tiny spark of sweetness. Some children called it snow pie. The recipe never made it into any cookbook, but it became part of frontier folklore, a symbol of endurance wrapped in a joke. The McCarthys have their own small stockpile, a sack of cornmeal, a few potatoes, a jar of lard, and one precious loaf of bread, already stiff from the cold. The mother cuts thin slices, toasts them slightly over the candle's heat, and passes them around. The smell of browned flour fills the small shelter, faint but comforting. The youngest child asks for milk, and the mother shakes her head. The cow is outside, buried but alive. She promises they will reach it once the storm settles. The child nods, content with the warm crumb of bread pressed into her hand. Travelers caught away from home sometimes had no food at all. They learned to eat the bark of young trees, scraping away the tough outer layer to reach the soft inner flesh. Modern studies show that this inner bark contains small amounts of starch, enough to give weak bodies another hour or two of strength. No one would call it pleasant, but survival rarely is. One explorer's log from 1859 records a man melting snow in a tin cup and adding a button from his coat for flavor. It was meant as humor, but it speaks to how the mind copes with hunger by turning it into story. The imagination feeds the spirit when the body has nothing left. Experts still discuss how frontier families balance nutrition and psychology. Some believe that ritual praying before a meager meal or describing it aloud helped people feel full. Others think it was simple willpower, honed by years of scarcity. Either way, it worked. Families who stayed calm lasted longer. Inside the shelter, the McCarthys eat slowly. The father takes the smallest piece and gives the rest to his children. He pretends to chew long after his food is gone, hoping the sound of it will comfort them. The mother hums quietly, a rhythm that fills the pauses between bites. The sound of eating in such silence is strange. Each crunch, each swallow, echoes softly against the snow walls. You can hear it too, that small music of survival. It feels almost sacred. Here is a curious practice worth remembering. Some families melted snow not just for water but for tea made from willow bark or pine needles. It tasted bitter, but it contained vitamin C, preventing a disease that settlers called winter rot. Later, scientists identified it as scurvy. By chance or intuition, these rough teas kept them alive. The McCarthys do the same. The mother drops a few needles from the evergreen branch she keeps for kindling into the pot of warm water. The air fills with a smell like clean wood and sap. The children wrinkle their noses, but they drink it anyway. The father tells them that in Norway, where his grandfather came from, people called it forest tea. The storm outside sighs, sending a faint shiver through the snow walls. The family finishes their small meal and settles back under their blankets. Hunger is still there, but quieter now, like an old animal that has decided to rest. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. The sound travels through snow like a note through a drum, deep and low. The father listens, then smiles faintly. He knows the wolves will not come close tonight. The smell of smoke and human breath keeps them away. Still, that sound reminds him of the world beyond this white cocoon, where life still moves under the open sky. Researchers who study historical survival stories often note how people described food in poetic terms after long isolation. A slice of bread became a gift from heaven, a spoon of lard, the taste of the Sunday. It is not exaggeration, but gratitude. Hunger teaches reverence. The family drifts towards sleep again, their stomachs not full but not empty enough to despair. The snow above them creaks softly, settling. You close your eyes and imagine the smell of pine tea, the faint warmth of shared breath, and the taste of bread baked weeks ago but still sacred. This is how they endured nights without fire or feast, by transforming necessity into ritual and hunger into quiet prayer. Every crumb was a promise that the world would feed them again once the storm was done. Morning never really comes inside a storm like this. The light that filters through the snow roof is dim and bluish, a ghost of daylight. The McCarthys stir beneath their blankets. Their stomachs ache softly, a reminder that the bread and pine tea of the night before were never enough. Hunger has a rhythm of its own, and on the second day it begins to hum through the body like a slow, steady drum. Frontier life had a way of stretching hunger into an art. When food ran out, imagination stepped in. The old journals describe families inventing names for meals they did not have, pretending to smell roast beef when all they were cooking was snow mixed with salt. One Kansas mother wrote that she told her children the snow soup was made by angels, so they would eat it without fear. Modern psychologists might call it a coping mechanism, but for her, it was love disguised as creativity. The McCarthys do something similar now. The mother crushes the last potato into flakes and stirs it into melted snow, adding a pinch of ash from the candle wick. She calls it smoke soup. The children smile at the name, even though the taste is flat and bitter. Sometimes names are nourishment. A strange detail appears in a traveller's diary from 1861. During a harsh blizzard in Dakota Territory, a group of settlers discovered that boiling leather straps in snow water made a kind of jelly that could be eaten. It had no flavor, but provided enough collagen to survive another day. Later experiments confirmed this unlikely trick. In a time before nutrition science, people discovered their own chemistry through desperation. You imagine the smell of that stew, faintly sour, almost animal. It fills the air inside the snow cave, mingling with the scent of damp wool. The family eats in silence, each mouthful slow and deliberate. There is no complaint, only concentration. Hunger makes even bitterness holy. Across the frontier, the line between starvation and survival was thin enough to blur into folklore. In New England, there were stories of settlers who claimed to have eaten candle wax or chewed on shoe soles softened over embers. In Scandinavia, stranded travelers boiled moss scraped from rocks. Archaeologists later found traces of these emergency foods in preserved cooking pots, confirming that such grim measures were real. The McCarthys still have one secret left. Wrapped in a scrap of cloth at the bottom of the bag is a small lump of sugar. The mother keeps it hidden, a treasure for when hope begins to fade. She knows that sweetness can lift the spirit even when the body is weak. Scientists later proved that a taste of sugar releases chemicals that spark energy and comfort. She does not need the proof. She has lived it. The father steps outside the burrow briefly, crawling through the narrow tunnel he dug. The air outside is bright and cruel. The world looks erased, every landmark buried under smooth white hills. There is no path, no sound but the faint hiss of snowflakes falling on snow. He cannot tell where the barn once stood. He kneels and scoops a handful of powder, presses it to his lips, and tastes the iron tang of frozen air. His beard is stiff with ice. He listens for the lowing of their cow but hears nothing. Still, he knows the animal might be alive, trapped somewhere under a drift. The warmth of large creatures can keep them breathing for days. He whispers a promise to dig for her when the wind dies completely. He returns inside, bringing the brightness of the outside world with him for a moment. The children blink, dazzled by the faint light reflecting off his coat. The mother reaches for his hands and rubs them to restore warmth. He nods silently, and she knows the storm has not yet released them. In times like these, families invented rituals to remind themselves that life still had rhythm. Some kept a small stick or nail and carved tiny marks for each day spent waiting. Others recited prayers or poems from memory, not out of piety, but for the comfort of repetition. In one settler's diary, A mother wrote a single line for each storm day. Still here, still breathing. Scholars have noted how such minimal records resemble modern meditation practices, focusing the mind on the present moment rather than on fear of what comes next. The human mind finds strange grace in structure, even in chaos. Inside the shelter, the mother hums the same tune she sang the night before. The melody repeats until it becomes a kind of heartbeat for the family. The children close their eyes and begin to sway gently with it. The father listens, his hunger dulled by the sound. A curious practice mentioned in a Montana newspaper from 1888 described settlers chewing pine resin during food shortages. It kept the mouth busy, produced a faint sweetness, and made the stomach believe it was working. The editor called it forest chewing gum. Archaeologists later found dried clumps of resin near abandoned cabins, proof that the custom was widespread. The McCarthys do not have pine resin, but they have snow. The mother gives each child a handful to melt in their mouths. The cold numbs their tongues and quiets their thirst. It is not pleasant, but it feels like something. Hunger, in the end, teaches patience. It forces the mind to slow down, to let go of panic, and remember that storms pass even when they seem eternal. Every bite, every swallow, every moment of stillness becomes a small act of defiance. The wind outside sighs again, softer now. The snow has stopped falling for the first time in 2 days. Through the thin walls, the family can hear faint creaks and drips as the temperature shifts. The father smiles for the first time. The worst of it might be ending. He does not say this aloud. He knows hope can be dangerous if spoken too soon. Instead, he closes his eyes and breathes deeply, letting the air fill his chest. It smells faintly of smoke, wool, and something new, the scent of thaw beginning. You can feel it too. Somewhere far above, the sky is brightening. The hunger remains, but so does something stronger. A pulse beneath the snow, a quiet knowledge that life is waiting for them beyond the white silence. When the snow finally quiets, the world outside turns to glass. The light is so sharp it makes your eyes ache. The McCarthys push open the narrow tunnel they dug, and a flood of icy brightness spills in. The air is still, the silence complete. The father listens carefully, expecting the muffled groan of wind, but hears only the soft crackle of snow shifting under its own weight. He breathes deeply. The storm is over. But the cold remains, heavier than before. Without the blizzard's movement, the air sits like a stone. It feels colder in stillness, sharper against skin. The family huddles again, reluctant to step fully into that frozen light. Their breath clouds and drifts upward, touching the low ceiling of their shelter. For the first time, they can hear faint sounds from the world beyond the distant rustle of something alive. A shape moves near the entrance. At first, they think it is the wind. Then comes a soft snort, a thump of hooves. The oxen. Against every chance, the animals have survived. They are half buried in snow but standing close, drawn by the smell of people. The father crawls forward and brushes frost from their hides. The warmth radiating from those broad bodies feels like sunlight. On the frontier, animals were not only labor, they were living furnaces. Families knew that when firewood ran out, the next best source of warmth came from fur and blood that still moved. Settlers wrote of sleeping in barns beside cows or horses, their breath turning frost to steam on the walls. According to one farming guide from the 1872, a cow's heat will warm a stall more surely than any hearth. The McCarthys move carefully through the snow tunnel until they reach the animals. The oxen's flanks steam faintly in the cold. The family presses close to them, feeling the heat through their thick hides. The father laughs softly, a sound that startles even him. For the first time in days, warmth touches his face. A curious note appears in a Norwegian immigrant's journal from 1864. He wrote that when his family was trapped in a mountain pass, they slept between their goats, covering everyone with a single wool blanket. They breathed, and we breathed, and the night was not so cruel. he wrote. Later researchers confirmed that shared body heat between humans and animals can raise the ambient temperature in small shelters by several degrees. No one at the time knew the numbers, but they understood the result. The McCarthys lead their animals toward the side of the cabin where the snow is shallower. The father uses his hands to dig an opening large enough for them to lie close. The smell of warm hide fills the air, heavy and earthy. The youngest child buries her face against the ox's shoulder and sighs, murmuring that it feels like hugging the world itself. In other parts of the frontier, dogs played this role. Sled teams in northern territories often slept curled beside their masters, tails over noses, forming small circles of warmth. One explorer described it as sleeping inside a heartbeat. The bond between person and animal was not sentimentality, it was mutual survival. The mother knows this too. She strokes the ox's side, whispering thanks in a voice barely audible. Her hands are cracked, her knuckles red and stiff, but the gesture feels like prayer. Gratitude, on the frontier, was often silent. A peculiar custom recorded in a prairie homesteader's diary mentions families keeping chickens inside during long storms. The birds huddled in corners near the stove, their warmth small but constant. Some even perched on bed frames. It sounds strange now, yet the practice was common across regions from Montana to Manitoba. Every heartbeat counted in the arithmetic of warmth. You can imagine the smell of it all. Hay, leather, smoke, feathers, sweat. The texture of life pressed close together in defiance of the cold. To the McCarthys, it is the smell of safety. The father feeds the oxen a handful of dry hay from a frozen sack. The animals chew slowly, their jaws moving in steady rhythm. The sound is hypnotic. The children watch as the beast's breath curls upward, mingling with their own, turning the small space into a cloud of life. There is another story, passed down among ranchers, about horses saving their owners by standing against the wind. One man in Wyoming claimed that during a whiteout, he pressed himself against his horse's chest, using it as a living wall until the storm passed. He said he could feel the animal's heart beating through the layers of his coat. Scholars still discuss whether such tales are embellished, but even if they are, the image endures. Two creatures sharing one pulse against the storm. You think about that now as you picture the McCarthys resting beside their oxen. The smallest child has fallen asleep with her hand still on the animal's flank. The father watches her, his face softened by the faint light. He remembers his own father telling him that animals are wiser in storms than people, because they do not fight what cannot be beaten. Outside, the snow glitters like crushed glass. The world has stopped moving, frozen in perfection. Inside, the sound of chewing and breathing fills the space. It is a music older than language. There is comfort in this strange intimacy between species. On the frontier, such bonds blurred the lines between family and herd, between wildness and civilization. It was not sentiment but partnership, forged by necessity. In modern times, people might call it empathy. For the McCarthys, it is simply life recognizing life. The mother finally speaks. She says softly that when the snow melts, they will thank the oxen first, before even lighting a new fire. The father nods. He understands the order of gratitude. The animals shift slightly, settling into the snow. The warmth between bodies builds again, slow and steady. The father closes his eyes, and for the first time since the storm began, sleep comes without fear. You can feel it too, that gentle calm that follows survival's hardest hour. It is not triumph, not victory, only the quiet joining of breath and heartbeat in a frozen world. In this small, glowing hollow beneath the ice, humankind and the creatures of the earth rest together, sharing the warmth that no storm can steal. When the family wakes again, the light inside their snow shelter has shifted to a thin silver glow. The storm has gone, but the cold has hardened the air until even breathing feels brittle. The McCarthys move slowly, each joint reluctant to bend. Their bodies ache from stillness, yet they are alive. Around them, every object, pot, Blanket, cup, seems rimmed in ice. The father looks at his hands and laughs quietly. His fingernails are edged with frost. Now comes the next challenge, staying alive until true warmth returns. Without a fire, they must rely on cleverness. Every scrap, every object, becomes a tool. The frontier was a laboratory of necessity. The same shovel that dug a tunnel could become a windbreak. The ashes from an old fire could serve as insulation, sprinkled along the floor to absorb moisture. Nothing was ever just one thing. Settlers learned to think this way because the land forced them to. Period. Letters and diaries reveal endless creativity born from exhaustion. One woman wrote that she lined her boots with sawdust to keep her toes from freezing, changing it each morning as it soaked up sweat. Another wrote of packing ashes into cloth bags and using them as hand warmers. The ash held heat from the day's sun better than expected. Scientists who tested this later found that wood ash retains a trace of warmth long after a fire dies, due to the trapped carbon particles within it. A curious habit among trappers involved using cast iron pots as miniature furnaces. They would place hot stones or coals inside and cover the pot with a lid, letting it radiate gentle heat for hours. The technique was passed from voyageurs to homesteaders, eventually becoming known as pot heat. Many journals mention it, but few describe the smell, the faint metallic scent of old iron warming the air, mixing with wool and smoke. It was comfort in its rawest form. The McCarthys have one such pot. It is blackened from years of cooking, its handle rough with rust. The father fills it halfway with ashes from the last fire and sets it near the center of the shelter. The ashes are cold now, but he knows that even cold ash dries the air and keeps frost from forming on the blankets. He stirs them once, the soft grey dust rising like ghost smoke. Inside the small chamber, every movement stirs a little hope. The mother unpacks a scrap of cloth that once covered the bread loaf. It is stiff with ice, but she folds it carefully and lays it over the pot as if guarding something precious. The children watch, their faces pale but calm. Across the frontier, small inventions like this became part of household folklore. Families shared tricks with neighbors during the short summer months, trading advice the way others traded seeds. One homesteader's manual from 1883 included a list titled Things That Save the Night, describing methods to hold heat when the fire failed. Among them were placing heated stones under straw mattresses, hanging quilts over doors, and rubbing iron tools to generate friction warmth. Modern readers might smile at such simplicity, yet each trick represented generations of trial and adaptation. Another peculiar method involved filling cloth sacks with dry dirt and keeping them near the body. The soil, once warmed by human skin, held heat long enough to stave off frostbite. Archaeologists later found remnants of these earth bags in abandoned cabins across the Midwest. No one could have guessed that dirt, so ordinary, could serve as a lifeline. The McCarthy's world is small but ingenious. The father inspects every object for purpose. The children's tin cups become scoops for snow. The handle of a broken pan serves as a wedge to pry open the tunnel. Even the candle stub is saved, its wick too short to burn but long enough to be used as thread. Survival is an art of repurposing. Outside, the oxen shift restlessly. The father steps through the tunnel to check them, his breath forming clouds in the blue morning air. He rubs their flanks and notices frost clinging to their nostrils. He remembers hearing once that rubbing snow on frozen skin can restore circulation. It seems strange, but it works. By applying cold to cold, the body warms more slowly and avoids deeper damage. This principle, long before anyone named it thermoregulation, was known through experience. He returns inside, stamping his boots. The mother has gathered their remaining ashes into a circle. The grey dust lies like a protective ring around the sleeping children. The air is drier already. She looks up and says softly, "It smells like home again." Her words are true. Ash has its own scent, faintly sweet, faintly bitter, a memory of flame. In it, the family finds something resembling normalcy. It reminds them that warmth once existed and will return. Historians still puzzle over how such small comforts sustained people through months of ice. Some suggest that the rituals mattered more than the physics. Whether or not the ash truly warmed them, the act of tending it gave purpose. To work, to fix, to improve those actions, kept despair at bay. The children stir and begin to play quietly, stacking bits of snow into tiny walls. Their laughter is faint but real. The mother watches them and smiles. Even in this frozen world, imagination persists. The father kneels by the pot, pressing his hands into the ashes until they come away coated in grey. He rubs them together, feeling the faint warmth left from friction. "Fire in the fingers," he says with a grin. The children repeat it, giggling. "Fire in the fingers." The phrase will stay with them long after this storm fades, a small spell against cold. You can almost feel it yourself, the coarse grit of ash between your palms, the dry air easing against your skin, the strange comfort of making heat where none should exist. As the day drifts on, the air inside the shelter grows easier. The vent hole still flutters with movement, proof that the outside world remains. The McCarthys rest, their minds lighter now. They have learned that survival is not only about what burns, but about what endures after the burning stops. When night comes again, the snow outside will glitter under the moon, calm and indifferent. Inside, the small family will sleep beside their pot of cold ash, a symbol of the fire they once had and the warmth they will find again. The storm has passed, but the prairie still holds its breath. Snow stretches to every horizon, smooth as silk, unbroken by tracks. The McCarthys step outside their shelter into a world that looks entirely new. Every sound feels magnified in the stillness. The crunch of boots, the soft snort of the oxen, the faint sigh of wind moving through frozen branches. The cold no longer screams. It hums quietly, like a low note held by the earth itself. They have survived. Yet in this quiet, survival feels fragile. The children speak in whispers as though afraid to wake the storm again. The father kneels, scooping up a handful of powdery snow, letting it slip through his fingers. It falls soundlessly, each crystal catching light for a heartbeat before vanishing. He smiles. He knows that stillness must be filled with something, or the mind begins to fray. So he starts to hum, a low, tuneless murmur at first. Then words begin to shape themselves. It is not a hymn or a formal song, but something between them, half melody, half memory. The mother joins in softly, her voice barely audible, like breath shaped into sound. Music has always been a companion to endurance. Records from frontier families often mention singing in the cold, not for performance, but for rhythm. When the body shakes with exhaustion, song steadies it. One settler wrote that she sang to keep her jaw from locking. Another said he sang simply to prove he still could. The voice becomes both warmth and proof of life. A curious note appears in a pioneer journal from 1881. It tells of families who taught their children to sing patterns of nonsense syllables during storms. The rhythm helped them keep time while waiting for rescue, and the repetition kept fear from swallowing them. Later, psychologists studying trauma called this self-soothing behavior, though the families would have called it prayer in disguise. The McCarthys sing now. The melody grows clearer. It drifts upward through the narrow tunnel and out into the open air. The sound echoes faintly against the snowdrifts, soft but persistent. The oxen shift and listen. Even the wind seems to pause. Historians have long wondered how families trapped for days without light or food kept from despair. Some point to song as a kind of medicine, not just a distraction, but a way to regulate breath, to slow the heart, to quiet the mind. Singing expands the lungs, warms the chest, and makes rhythm out of chaos. It transforms fear into something that can be carried on a note. The mother begins to hum a tune from her childhood, something her grandmother used to sing when storms rattled the windows back in Ireland. The words have long faded, but the melody remains. It rises and falls like a lullaby and fills the frozen air with warmth that no fire could match. The children listen first, then join in, shyly at first, then louder. Their small voices echo through the snow cave, bouncing back soft and strange. They laugh at the echo, and for a moment it feels like the walls themselves are singing back. There is a letter from a teacher who lived in Kansas in 1875. She wrote that during a blizzard, the students in her one-room schoolhouse began to sing while waiting for rescue. She claimed the sound was so strong that a search party located them by following the faint strains of Home, Sweet Home. Modern historians debate whether the story is true, but the symbolism endures. Song as a beacon through white silence. Inside the shelter, the McCarthys keep singing, letting their fear turn to rhythm. The father stamps his boots gently in time. The children clap their hands softly. The walls seem to vibrate with the sound, catching it and returning it like the heartbeat of the earth. A strange but charming detail in one Scandinavian frontier diary describes families teaching lullabies to their livestock. The writer claimed cows produced more milk in winter when sung to during milking. Modern animal behaviorists might smile at that, yet studies have since shown that steady, calm sound does indeed reduce animal stress. The settlers may not have known the science, but they knew the comfort of connection. You can almost feel it now, the warmth of shared sound, the vibration in your chest when you hum softly in a quiet room. The body becomes its own instrument of survival. In this frozen landscape, music is the only fire they can still create. As their song fades, silence returns, but it is no longer empty. It feels filled with memory, with the echo of human voices pressing gently against the cold. The family settles again, smiling faintly. The mother smooths the children's hair and whispers, "As long as we can sing, we are not alone." The historian in you might pause here, noting that songs of hardship have outlived every storm. Work songs, lullabies, spirituals, they are threads that connect centuries of survival. Scholars still discuss whether music arose from joy or fear, but here in the snow, the answer feels clear. It comes from the need to turn breath into something beautiful before it fades into the air. The father hums one last line, quiet enough that only those closest can hear it. The sound blends with the slow rhythm of the oxen breathing. The snow above their heads glows faintly as sunlight tries to break through. For a moment, the world feels suspended between silence and song, between death and waking. Then the youngest child laughs, bright and sudden. The others join in, their laughter rising through the tunnel like bells. The storm has left scars across the land, but in this moment, the only thing that matters is the music of being alive. By midday, the next light begins to filter through the sky, turning the white drifts into silver glass. The McCarthys move slowly, their bodies stiff from sleep and cold. They have learned how fragile survival can feel, yet they also feel strangely calm. The world is quiet again, but quiet can be deceptive. Snow hides both safety and danger. When the father pushes aside the packed snow at the entrance, the air that rushes in is painfully cold. The first breath always burns after a night underground. He looks around, blinking at the brightness. The sky is pale and clean. The wind has gone, but in its place comes another hazard, the slow suffocation of smoke that cannot escape. Many settlers feared this moment more than the blizzard itself. When the fire was gone and the hearth frozen, trying to relight it could be as risky as letting it die. Smoke from damp wood or clogged chimneys could fill a small cabin in minutes. Accounts from frontier diaries often mention families choking on their own attempts at warmth. The McCarthys still have a few sticks of wood buried under the snow outside. The father retrieves them, shaking off the frost. They are soaked through but solid. The mother helps, her fingers already numb. Together, they set the pieces near the door, hoping the faint sun might dry them. In many frontier homes, wet wood was a constant enemy. The green timber used for building cabins trapped moisture that turned to steam when heated. It hissed and spat in the hearth, coating the room with black smoke. Families learned to recognize the smell of it: sharp, acidic, and a little sweet. You can almost taste it now, the way it scratches the back of your throat. An old Nebraska newspaper once printed an article titled "Wood That Bites Back," warning settlers never to burn cottonwood or elm unless desperate. Both woods gave thick smoke but little heat. Yet desperation came often, and people burned what they had. The ashes filled their lungs, but they were alive. The father builds a small pile inside a metal pan instead of on the ground. It is safer that way, easier to smother if smoke begins to fill the air. He uses a scrap of fabric dipped in lard as a wick. The mother shields the spark with her hands, whispering a small prayer that feels half habit, half hope. The flame catches briefly, then sputters. Smoke curls upward, filling the narrow space with its dark scent. A curious entry in a trapper's notebook from 1872 mentions that he would hold his face close to new smoke and inhale gently. He claimed the first breath told him whether the wood would burn clean or foul. Modern scientists later found that the sharpness of the smell corresponds to the release of methanol and water vapor, an instinctive chemistry learned without words. The McCarthys read the smoke in their own way. The father coughs once, then opens the tunnel wider. Fresh air rushes in, swirling with the smoke. The mother fans the flame gently with a folded cloth. It steadies. The orange glow returns, timid but real. Historians continue to discuss whether early settlers truly mastered firecraft or whether survival was often luck. Some letters describe careful skill, others sheer accident. The truth probably lies in between. Out here, every spark was a gamble. The smell of burning wood fills the shelter. It is both comfort and danger. The children cover their faces with cloth, their eyes watering. The smoke stings, yet they smile. It smells like home. The faint warmth reaches their hands, and the world feels alive again. A strange superstition circulated among frontier women. Never let a fire die completely, even during the night. They believed that a fire's spirit protected the household from illness. Many kept embers buried under ash, feeding them a breath or two at dawn to bring them back. Later, archaeologists found iron pots containing preserved coals near ancient hearths. Whether by faith or by instinct, those women were preserving heat in its smallest possible form. The McCarthys have no embers left, but they keep the tradition alive in spirit. The father leans close to the small flame and exhales softly, his breath shaping it. The mother calls it waking the fire. The children repeat the phrase like a secret spell. When the wood finally catches, the sound is almost musical. A soft crackle, a sigh, then a whispering pop. The air warms by degrees, so slowly you hardly notice until the frost begins to soften on their hair and coats. The smoke thins, rising in a steady stream toward the vent hole above. You can imagine the color now, that fragile golden glow painting the snow walls with warmth. It feels like sunlight trapped underground. The father holds his hands over it, turning them slowly. The heat stings at first, then soothes. There is a curious note in a diary from an Iowa blacksmith who once wrote, "The first fire after a storm smells of forgiveness." He believed that after each blizzard, lighting flame was a promise that life would continue. Researchers still quote that line when describing frontier spirituality. It was not about religion, but about renewal. The McCarthys sit quietly, staring at the flickering light. Their faces soften in the glow. The youngest child giggles when the sparks jump, her laughter rising like music in the close air. The father adds another stick. He knows it might fill the air with smoke again, but for now he does not care. The fire is small, but it is theirs. The scent of frozen wood burning is harsh yet beautiful. It smells of survival, of effort rewarded. Outside, the world waits, silent and white. Inside, the little flame dances, stubborn and bright, proof that even after the sky has turned against you, warmth can still be coaxed from ruin. The fire fades to embers by afternoon. Smoke curls gently through the small vent, carrying the scent of charred wood into the quiet air. The storm has left a world both beautiful and brutal. Outside, snow lies smooth as marble, and inside, the McCarthys stir slowly back to life. For the first time in days, the children venture beyond the doorway, their boots crunching in the powder. The sound seems too loud after so much silence. Children born on the frontier learned to move through winters as if they were made for it. They grew up carrying water in frozen buckets, mending fences with numb fingers, feeding animals while snow crusted on their lashes. Work replaced fear before they were old enough to name it. One diary from 1889 describes a girl of 9 carrying a pail of coals half a mile to keep a neighbor's hearth from dying. She came back with her eyebrows frozen white, the author wrote, but smiling like she'd fetched the sundae. You can picture that same bravery now. The McCarthy children run short distances, stamping their feet in the snow, shouting at their echoes. Their laughter drifts over the white field like birdsong. For a moment, the land feels gentle again. Frontier children often became the first signs of life after storms. They were sent out to find paths, to check traps, to see whether fences still stood. Their size was an advantage. They could walk over crusted snow without breaking through. One prairie father wrote that his sons walked on clouds while I sank to my knees. Historians still marvel at the independence frontier childhood demanded, though modern readers might call it hardship in disguise. The McCarthy boy spots something dark near a drift and calls for his father. Together they uncover a frozen bucket of grain. The discovery feels like treasure. They carry it inside, the weight awkward but joyous. The mother grinds some of it between 2 stones, adding snow to make a coarse paste. It will not taste good, but it will fill them. A curious bit of folklore from the northern plains told that children who whistled during snowstorms could call back spring. The tune was supposed to please the wind spirits and soften the weather. Families knew it was superstition, yet they let their children do it anyway. Hope, even in play, kept courage alive. The McCarthy children whistle now, though not for magic. They do it for fun, the sound thin and sweet against the vast cold air. Their mother smiles. She knows that this noise means her family has not surrendered to silence. Experts studying frontier life note that children's games were rarely idle. They taught skill as well as distraction. Throwing snowballs trained coordination needed for loading rifles. Building forts taught teamwork. Sliding on frozen ponds prepared them to balance on rough terrain. Even fun had to serve survival. Inside the shelter, the mother watches as her children return with rosy faces and bright eyes. They have made snow figures near the entrance, shaping them with sticks for arms and bits of straw for hair. She laughs quietly. In times of plenty, it might have been a game. In times like this, it is a reminder that imagination is a weapon against despair. One letter from a missionary teacher in 1873 describes her astonishment at how children of settlers seem to endure cold better than adults. They are thin as kindling, and yet they never shiver, she wrote. Modern physiology later explained why young bodies generate heat faster through higher metabolic rates. The settlers did not know this. They simply trusted that youth meant resilience. The father joins the children outside. He shows them how to stamp paths into the snow so that they will not lose their bearings when the next storm arrives. He explains that tracks in fresh snow act like signposts and that their shape can guide them home even in darkness. Scholars now refer to this as primitive mapping, an instinctive way to navigate before compasses became common in every household. As the family works, the oxen graze on hay dug from under the drifts. Their movement stirs small clouds of glittering frost. The air is alive again with quiet activity. A small anecdote from a woman's journal in Manitoba mentions that after storms, parents often rewarded children with stories instead of sweets. They called them warm tales, meant to keep minds bright when food was scarce. Tonight, the McCarthys will do the same. When evening falls, the family gathers near the faint coals of their fire. The children nestle close while the mother begins a story she remembers from her own mother, a tale of a fox who tricked the wind into sleeping so that spring could return. The rhythm of her voice replaces the crackle of flames. The children listen, wide-eyed, as if the fox might appear right outside their shelter. In that moment, storytelling becomes more than comfort. It becomes proof that imagination endures when everything else freezes. Anthropologists later wrote that tales told in storms carried coded survival lessons, warnings about directions, seasons, or the behavior of snow. But to those who told them, they were simply ways to keep the soul awake. The father smiles and adds his own ending to the tale, saying the fox later married the moon and made sure the snow always melted in time for planting. The children giggle. The story grows longer, brighter, alive. Outside, the first stars appear, faint behind thin clouds. Inside, the glow of ember light flickers on smiling faces. The storm has tested them, but the laughter of children fills the hollow with something stronger than warmth. You can almost hear it yourself, their laughter, the soft rhythm of the mother's story, the crackle of settling snow. It is the sound of life pushing gently against the quiet weight of winter, proving again that resilience is not always strength or anger, but the ability to play, to tell stories, and to dream when the world is cold. The morning rises pale and slow, as if the sun is reluctant to return. Thin light spreads across the snow, glinting on drifts and broken branches. The McCarthys stand outside their shelter, blinking against the brightness. The world is silent, except for the faint groan of trees heavy with frost. It feels like the earth is still asleep. Then, faintly, the sound of a bell drifts through the cold. At first it is so soft that they think it might be the wind, but then it rings again, clear and deliberate. The father's heart jumps. Somewhere beyond the frozen field, another family has survived. Across the frontier, this was how people found one another after storms, through sound and light. When paths vanished under snow, voices became maps. Settlers hung lanterns outside windows to signal safety, or struck pots with spoons to echo across the plains. A single bell meant, "We're alive." Two meant, "We need help." The father listens closely, counting one bell, then silence, then another. Relief warms him more than the fire ever could. He cups his hands and shouts, "We're here!" The sound carries strangely through the frozen air, flattening and stretching as it travels. After a pause, an answering shout returns, distant but clear. Historians have often marveled at how these crude communication systems worked so well. Sound travels farther in cold air, especially over snow, where it glides along the surface instead of being absorbed. Modern acousticians have measured this effect and found that a shout can carry for miles on a windless winter day. The settlers did not know the science, but they knew the power of a human voice. The McCarthys quickly begin to build their own signal. The father takes a small lantern from his pack, the one he saved for emergencies, and lights it with a coal from their fire. The glass is cracked, but it holds. He places it on a long stick and pushes it high above the snowbank. The golden glow cuts through the blue-white world like a spark in the void. A curious note in a Manitoba newspaper from 1887 describes a community that survived a storm by using what they called Morse lanterns. Families agreed ahead of winter that 3 short flashes meant safe, while an OTA2, long, steady light, meant help. It was an early kind of coded language, created by necessity and remembered by heart. Scholars still discuss how such systems spread from one settlement to another without formal instruction. The McCarthys have no code, but their single light is enough. In the distance, another faint glow appears, blinking once, twice, then steady. The father smiles. He knows who it must be, the Olsons, who live half a mile away. The families had traded tools and stories before the snow came. Now, across a field of frozen silence, they trade reassurance. Inside the shelter, the mother begins to pack their few things. She knows they will need to travel soon, once the snow crust hardens enough to walk on. The children chatter excitedly about seeing their friends again. Their laughter carries easily through the air, joining the faint bell still ringing now and then. A peculiar account from a missionary school teacher tells of how children learned to read the language of winter signals. A red cloth tied to a stick meant food to share. Smoke rising in 3 short puffs meant danger. These codes were passed by observation rather than teaching, a silent vocabulary built from snow and light. The McCarthys do not have cloth bright enough to use, but the father waves a branch wrapped in his scarf. In the distance, a figure waves back. The connection feels miraculous. The mother begins to cry quietly, not from sadness, but from the strange relief that comes after holding fear too long. The father places a hand on her shoulder. "We're not alone," he says. His voice cracks a little as he says it. Across history, isolation was the frontier's greatest danger. People could freeze not only in body, but in spirit. Letters written months later often spoke of the silence that followed storms. A silence so deep it felt like the world had forgotten them. Finding another voice in that emptiness was like rediscovering the heartbeat of humanity itself. The children dance in the snow, stamping their feet in circles. Their joy spreads warmth through the cold air. The mother wipes her eyes and joins them, clapping softly in rhythm. A curious memory preserved in an oral account from a Dakota settler describes how neighbors sometimes celebrated survival after a blizzard by sending baked bread from one house to another once paths reopened. They called it the Feast of First Footsteps. The act was symbolic, a way to acknowledge both loss and endurance. Historians believe this tradition inspired later community gatherings known as Thaw suppers. The McCarthys will do something similar. Tomorrow, when the snow crust hardens, they will walk to the Olsons' cabin with their last loaf of bread, split in half. The father says it is good luck to share the first food after a storm. The mother nods, smiling again. You can feel the meaning in this exchange, the invisible web of small signals stretching across the frozen world. A bell, a shout, a lantern's glow. Each one a declaration that human connection still exists, that warmth does not belong only to fire. As dusk falls, the 2 lights continue to flicker across the snow. The distance between them seems smaller now. The air is cold enough to sting, yet the world feels inhabited again. The storm that once buried them has turned into a bridge of sound and light. The father watches the horizon, the faint glow of the other cabin shimmering in the frost. He whispers, almost to himself, "We are seen." And in the endless quiet of winter, that single truth is enough to keep the heart alive. Night returns clear and sharp, the stars bright enough to cast faint shadows across the snow. The McCarthys lie awake for a long time, listening to the quiet between each creak of the ice settling outside. The storm has passed, but its echo remains in their bones. They know now how thin the line between life and loss can be, and that knowledge feels both heavy and holy. Faith was a strange companion on the frontier. For some, it was prayer whispered into darkness. For others, it was simple habit, the rhythm of work and patience that kept the mind steady when the world offered no comfort. The McCarthys, like most families, carried pieces of both kinds. They had no preacher, no church for miles, but the mother kept a small Bible wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her pack. The pages had grown soft from years of being handled by cold fingers. That morning she takes it out. The ink has faded, but she reads anyway, tracing the words more by memory than sight. The children listen, not to the meaning but to the tone of her voice. It is calm, slow, and warm. In the frozen world around them, the sound feels alive. One surviving letter from a settler in Montana in 1885 tells how families created their own rituals during snowbound weeks. They gathered in silence, lit a candle if they had one, and recited lines they remembered from any book that brought comfort. Some quoted scripture, others poetry. One family even read from a farm manual because the rhythm of the words was familiar. Scholars have suggested that it was not belief but repetition that mattered most. The act of speaking something known created a sense of order in the chaos. A curious record from the Northern Territories tells of families who practiced listening prayer. They would sit together quietly and describe aloud the sounds they heard outside, the wind's change, the groan of trees, the crack of ice, and treat each sound as an answer. Later, anthropologists compared this to meditation practices from other cultures, noting how the human instinct for meaning often turns survival itself into ceremony. The McCarthys do not speak much. After the reading, they simply sit. The father closes his eyes, hearing the faint hum of wind beyond the snow walls. The mother breathes deeply, her hands still resting on the book. The children lean against her, their heads on her lap. Faith, in moments like this, does not arrive as revelation but as quiet agreement to keep breathing. Historians continue to discuss how frontier families balanced religion with the brutal realism of their daily lives. Some settlers believed their endurance was proof of divine favor. Others saw it as a test that had no answer. What unites every record is the need to believe in something beyond the cold, whether that was God, the land, or simply the sunrise. The father looks up through the vent hole where faint stars gleam. He says softly that each star must be a soul that found its way through another storm. His wife smiles, half amusement and half affection. The children look upward too, their eyes wide. The youngest asks which one is theirs. He points to the brightest and says, "That one watches us until morning." A letter from a Swedish immigrant family mentions a similar practice of naming stars after lost relatives. They said the light of those stars made the night less lonely. Modern astronomers would smile at the sentiment, but perhaps they would agree that even distant light can feel like companionship. Inside the shelter, the small fire burns low. The mother hums again, this time not a song but a kind of breath set to rhythm. The sound fills the space, binding everyone in calm. It is neither hymn nor lullaby, but something in between. Researchers studying frontier diaries often note how people describe storms as having personalities, a voice, a temper, even a will. One woman wrote that she prayed not for safety but for the storm itself to rest. Whether she believed the snow could hear her or simply needed to believe that someone could, her words still hold power. The McCarthys have begun to think that way too. The father mutters thanks to the wind for sparing the oxen. The mother nods, saying that the storm has done its work and now sleeps. The children repeat her words softly, half chant, half comfort. You can almost hear it, the small voices echoing in the snow cave, the faint rustle of blankets, the quiet flicker of flame. Faith here is not a sermon or doctrine. It is the warmth of shared silence, the steady rhythm of breath that refuses to stop. Outside, frost blooms along the trees like silver lace. The stars shimmer, distant and patient. The land looks endless, but inside this small hollow, the family has found a center. They close their eyes, and the mother's voice fades into the sound of wind. No one can prove whether faith saves lives, but it gives shape to waiting. It turns fear into a story that can be endured. As the night deepens, the McCarthy's prayer is not for miracles, but for the simple mercy of another morning. And when that first pale light touches the snow again, it will feel like the world breathing in. The days that follow feel dreamlike. The world outside is wrapped in white silence, as if the storm has erased everything that once existed and replaced it with something softer. The McCarthys begin to move slowly back into the rhythm of living. Every sound, every smell, feels amplified against the stillness. When people survive great winters, they start to tell stories about them almost immediately. It is a way of taming the memory before it turns into fear. On the frontier, entire legends were born from such nights. Neighbors would gather in spring and trade tales about the storms that nearly took them, each account bending slightly with every retelling. Over time, those stories grew into folklore, shaping how future generations imagined winter itself. The McCarthy children will one day repeat their own version of what happened here. It will begin simply, "The fire went out, the snow covered the roof, the oxen saved us." But later, When memory softens, they will add magic. Perhaps they will say the snow listened when their mother sang, or that the stars appeared to guide their father's hands when he dug the tunnel. That is how memory becomes myth. A curious record from a rural church archive in Manitoba describes families naming each great blizzard as if it were a living thing. They called them the Year of White Silence, the Long Drift, or the Breath of God. Naming gave form to the invisible. Modern historians see this habit as a blend of poetry and practicality. It helped people mark time in a landscape where calendars often lost meaning. The McCarthy's storm will likely earn its own name, perhaps the night of the buried fire. The phrase sounds heavy yet hopeful, exactly like what they lived through. Around their small fire, the father begins to share an old tale he once heard from a trader about a man who walked through a storm so fierce that the snow turned to feathers around him. In the story, the man realized the feathers came from angels shaking their wings to keep him warm. The children listen, wide-eyed. The mother smiles but does not interrupt. Stories like this one are not told to be believed, but to remind listeners that kindness can exist even in cruelty. Across the world, winter legends follow the same shape. Ancient Norse sagas told of frost giants battling for control of the sky, while native tribes of the plains spoke of a white buffalo whose breath brought snow to test the courage of humans. Historians still discuss whether these myths were born purely from imagination or from real memories of natural disasters. Whatever their source, they gave people something vital, a way to describe the indescribable. The McCarthys begin to weave their own version of such a tale without even realizing it. The father says that the storm was not just weather, but a kind of teacher, one that took everything away to show what mattered most. The mother nods. The children repeat his words as though reciting a lesson. In time, those sentences will echo in other mouths, carried forward as heritage rather than hardship. Folklore grows easily in the soil of survival. It collects the details that logic overlooks: the glow of a candle inside snow, the hum of a vent that sounds almost like breathing, the warmth of an animal pressed against your side. These are the fragments that later generations call miracles. A peculiar note found in a settler's journal describes people leaving bits of bread or grain at the edge of their property after a storm, as an offering to the wind. They believed it would ensure gentler weather next time. Some scholars consider it superstition, while others suggest it reflected an early understanding of respect for nature's cycles. To give back was to acknowledge that survival was never entirely one's own doing. When the father steps outside now, he follows that same instinct. He scatters a few handfuls of grain onto the snow. The oxen watch him curiously. He smiles at them and whispers something about sharing luck. The mother, seeing this, feels her throat tighten with quiet emotion. Gratitude takes many forms. That night, the family sits close again, the children drowsy. The mother tells a final story before sleep. It is about a young woman who wandered into a storm and found shelter inside a snowdrift where she met the spirit of winter itself. The spirit offered her two choices: warmth for one night or wisdom for a lifetime. She chose wisdom, and in doing so, learned how to make warmth whenever she needed it. The father listens, eyes half closed. He asks, softly, what the wisdom was. The mother smiles and replies, to remember that cold ends but kindness does not. Long after they have fallen asleep, the wind stirs again, not in fury this time, but as if to carry the story away. It drifts across the frozen land, over fences, through bare trees, into other homes where other families sit waiting for dawn. Stories travel faster than storms and last longer than any frost. If you listen closely, you might still hear them in winter winds, whispers of the ones who endured, the ones who made legends out of survival. Each tale adds another layer to the long memory of human endurance, reminding us that the cold has never been just an enemy, but also a storyteller in disguise. The morning after their first peaceful sleep feels almost unreal. The wind has vanished completely, leaving behind a silence so deep that even footsteps seem to hesitate. The McCarthys crawl from their shelter into a landscape washed in light. The sky is a perfect blue, too bright to look at for long. The snow sparkles with the kind of beauty that hides danger beneath it. The air is crisp and still. Each breath feels like inhaling glass. The father stands quietly, letting the sun touch his face. He can smell pine and frozen earth, the faint sweetness that comes when ice begins to loosen its hold. He smiles. The storm is finished. Every great winter ends this way, with light returning too slowly to trust. Diaries from settlers often describe these mornings with wonder. After days of blindness, they would step outside and see a world reborn. Fences looked like ribs rising through white skin, and the roofs of cabins shone like crystal. Even misery seemed beautiful in the afterglow. The McCarthys begin to dig a path toward the barn. The father uses a broken shovel, the handle worn smooth. The mother follows with a basket, gathering what little remains unspoiled. The children laugh as they toss clumps of snow into the air, watching them scatter like silver dust. It feels like play again, though the cold still bites. Inside the barn they find the cow alive, buried nearly to her neck in snow but unharmed. Her breath puffs out in small clouds, steaming in the sunlight. The family cheers. The father strokes her neck and murmurs a thank you. The oxen grunt softly nearby, stamping their hooves. The small space feels warmer than the house ever did. One settler's letter from the 1,870 describes this same miracle. After a 4-day storm, his cows had survived by eating their own bedding and melting snow with their breath. They were warmer than I was, he wrote. Researchers later confirmed that livestock bodies can raise the temperature in enclosed barns by more than 10 degrees. The settlers had discovered this truth long before anyone measured it. The mother sets about cleaning, shaking out damp blankets and brushing ice from the doorway. The father gathers wood buried beneath a drift, now frozen solid. It will take hours to dry, but he works anyway. In the sunlight, the snow begins to soften, dripping from the roof in slow, rhythmic drops. Each drop glitters before it hits the ground, as if time itself hesitates. The youngest child scoops up a handful of melting snow and licks it. The water is so cold it hurts her teeth. She laughs anyway. The taste of real water after days of melting ice inside a cave feels like a feast. Throughout frontier history, the first thaw carried symbolic power. Farmers wrote that the sound of dripping roofs meant forgiveness. One entry in a Dakota journal from 1884 reads, "The world breathes again, and I with it." Scholars have argued over whether this poetic language was faith or exhaustion. It was probably both. As the day warms slightly, the family takes stock of what remains. The cabin roof has sagged under the weight of snow but still stands. The fire pit is buried, yet smoke from the morning's flame still rises faintly through the vent. The air smells of ash and sunlight. The father shakes his head in quiet disbelief. "We have lost nothing that cannot be rebuilt," he says. In nearby settlements, similar scenes unfold. People emerge from buried homes to wave at distant neighbors, their voices carrying far in the clear air. They will tell each other stories for years about this storm, the sounds, the smells, the silence. Even the smallest details will become legend. The McCarthys work until their hands ache, clearing a small path from the door to the barn. When the sun dips lower, they stop to rest. The world around them is gold now, glowing where the snow catches light. Steam rises faintly from their breath and from the animals' backs. It is the quiet glow of survival itself. A curious entry in a farmer's almanac from the time calls this moment the thaw of the heart. The phrase meant that once light returned, even hardship seemed distant. Historians still use it to describe how frontier families transitioned from crisis to rebuilding. The human spirit, it seems, follows the weather. The father takes the family to a nearby hill so they can see farther. From there, the land looks endless. The drifts stretch into soft waves, sparkling under the Sunday. The mother squeezes his hand, whispering that it looks like the ocean she once saw as a girl. He nods, smiling, though he has never seen the sea himself. The children roll in the snow, their laughter echoing through the hollow air. Their cheeks glow red, their eyes bright. Watching them, the parents feel something rare and wordless. The storm took their peace, but gave them something stronger, a kind of clarity, the awareness that every moment of warmth is a miracle worth noticing. You can almost feel it yourself, the cold air sharp in your lungs, the light so bright it hurts, the strange quiet that follows a battle with nature. It is not victory they feel, but gratitude. Gratitude that the world, despite its cruelty, still holds beauty enough to make you stop and breathe. As the family walks back to their cabin, the snow crunches underfoot in a rhythm like music. The wind sighs gently through the open field, no longer fierce but tender. The storm has ended, and with it the long fear of endless winter. When night falls, the sky will blaze with stars again. The snow will glow faintly in their light, and the McCarthys will sleep without fear for the first time in many nights. The thaw has begun, and with it, the slow return of hope. The thaw brings more than light. It also reveals what the storm has taken. As the sun begins to climb higher each day, the snow settles and cracks, sinking into itself. The air still bites, but it no longer cuts. Meltwater trickles through the drifts, forming tiny streams that snake toward the low fields. The McCarthys walk carefully through this softening world, their boots sinking deep with every step. When the wind is gone, sound returns. The first thing they hear is the creak of the cabin roof as it adjusts to the warmth. Then comes the faint cry of a crow, a sound so ordinary it feels like a miracle. The mother closes her eyes and smiles at it. It means life has resumed somewhere beyond the white horizon. Every storm leaves a mark. The family soon sees what the snow concealed. A fence lies broken, the barn door splintered. The father's tools are scattered, frozen into drifts. One of the oxen limps slightly, its legs stiff from the cold. The mother counts the hens and finds only two left. Loss is everywhere, but so is relief. The land, though scarred, still holds them. Historical letters from the frontier often describe this balance between destruction and gratitude. One woman wrote, "The blizzard gives and takes, but never forgets us." She meant that the storm strips life down to its smallest truths. When the snow melts, whatever remains feels sacred. The McCarthys begin to repair what they can. The father straightens the fence, his hands raw and swollen. The mother uses a bit of rope to fix the barn latch. The children gather broken branches, stacking them into neat piles for later fires. Their work is quiet and steady, the rhythm of people who have learned that action itself is hope. A curious entry from an 1880 agricultural journal records that many settlers reused fallen snowdrift boards and broken beams to patch roofs. It notes that a cabin rebuilt with storm debris was said to remember the wind, meaning it would resist the next blow. The phrase survived for decades as a kind of blessing. By midday, the sky begins to cloud again, but not with snow. Thin veils of grey pass across the sun, softening its glare. Meltwater runs from the roof in steady lines, freezing again in the shade. The air smells of wet wood and soil waking beneath the frost. The family pauses to eat what little remains of their supplies. The bread is gone, so they make a meal of boiled grain and a bit of milk from the cow, who stands patiently nearby. The taste is faintly sweet, earthy and real. For the first time in weeks, no one hurries their bites. In many journals, settlers describe this first meal after a storm as the most memorable of their lives. It was never about flavor or abundance, but about the act of eating under open sky again. One farmer in Iowa wrote that his family dined on a stew of beans and grace. The line later appeared in local church sermons, a small piece of poetry born from hunger. The McCarthys finish eating and sit together, facing the horizon. The light stretches long and golden over the snow. The father says quietly that they will rebuild, even if it takes all spring. The mother nods. She knows he says it not for her, but for himself. The children listen in silence, too tired to speak, but too alive to rest. Scholars studying pioneer life often note that recovery after storms was as much emotional as physical. People mourned animals and neighbors, but rarely wrote openly about grief. Instead, they recorded the work that followed. To build again was to grieve without words. As the day fades, the father walks to the hill overlooking their land. From there, he sees the faint outline of other cabins in the distance, smoke curling from chimneys like thin threads reaching for heaven. Each line of smoke tells the same story. We are still here. He removes his hat and stands quietly for a moment. The cold air stings his scalp, but he does not move. He whispers a few names, neighbors who did not answer their lantern signals. Some may still be alive, others lost beneath the snow. There are always both. In one remarkable document from the era, a settler named Martha Eames wrote that after each winter, families would carve small marks on fence posts for those who had not returned. The fences remembered what we could not bear to say, she wrote. Those marks became a kind of collective memory across the plains. The father runs his gloved hand along the fence rail, rough and splintered. He thinks of those marks and decides to make none today. To him, this storm will not be remembered by loss, but by what still stands. As twilight deepens, the snow turns blue and silver again. The land seems endless, the horizon soft as breath. The children chase each other near the barn, their laughter bright and high against the quiet. The mother leans against the doorway, her arms folded, watching them. She feels the ache of exhaustion and the pulse of gratitude in the same heartbeat. You can feel it too, the sharp air, the soft light, the fragile peace that follows hardship. The storm has ended, but its lessons linger in every step they take. Each movement across the thawing snow is a promise. Life continues. When darkness finally comes, they retreat inside. The fire burns small but steady. The roof creaks. The oxen shift, and somewhere outside, a crow calls again before settling to sleep. In that sound, faint but sure, lies the simple truth of the frontier. After every storm, something sings. The land begins to awaken in quiet ways. The snow no longer blinds the eyes but softens under the sun, shrinking into patterns of shadow and light. The McCarthys move through their routines slowly, still cautious as if the storm might change its mind. The air is filled with the scent of melting frost and damp wood. Every sound echoes farther now. Dripping water, the shifting groan of ice, a bird's cry in the distance. For all the strength it took to endure, it is the small, ordinary things that hold them together now. The mother mends a tear in her shawl. The father oils his tools. The children run their hands along the fence posts, tracing rough wood like an old map. Their movements are careful, reverent. Survival has taught them to notice everything. Historians writing about the frontier often remark that women carried a kind of quiet genius through each winter. While the men broke ice and cut wood, women turned scraps into miracles. They sewed, mixed, improvised, and kept homes alive when nothing else would. The ingenuity of women became the architecture of endurance. Inside the cabin, the mother spreads out her sewing box. The thread is nearly gone, but she knows how to stretch what little remains. She cuts thin strips of fabric from old bedding, twisting them into cords strong enough to mend clothing. The children watch, fascinated by how her hands never pause. The sound of thread pulling through cloth is soft but steady, a rhythm more comforting than any clock. A remarkable detail appears in an 1872 homestead letter written by a woman in Nebraska. She described sewing her family's mittens from the lining of a wagon cover and reinforcing them with flour paste to make them windproof. "It was not beauty but cleverness that saved us," she wrote. Modern textile experts tested this odd recipe and found that the starch in the paste indeed added stiffness and insulation. The wisdom of necessity always outpaces invention. The McCarthy mother uses her own version of this trick. She melts a bit of animal fat and rubs it into the patches she has sewn, sealing them against moisture. The smell is faintly unpleasant, but the effect is good. The fabric turns dark and glossy. She smiles, satisfied. Frontier women were also healers. When the cold cracked skin and frostbite set in, they turned to whatever the land offered. Some used goose grease mixed with ashes to protect hands. Others brewed teas from willow bark to dull the pain of aching joints. A curious note from a prairie journal describes one family using boiled onion skins as a poultice for frostbite. Medical historians still debate whether it worked or simply gave comfort. Either way, it was something to do besides waiting. The McCarthy mother prepares her own small remedy now. She crushes dried herbs she kept in a tin yarrow and sage and mixes them with a few drops of melted lard. The scent rises, earthy and sharp. She rubs the mixture onto the father's cracked hands. He winces, then sighs as the warmth seeps in. Their work feels sacred, though no one would call it that. On the frontier, acts of care were prayers without words. Every stitch, every remedy, every shared cup of tea whispered the same truth: life is worth tending. The children sit near the fire, watching the orange light flicker over the newly patched clothes. The mother begins to hum again, not to pass time but to steady her hands. The sound fills the small room with warmth that has nothing to do with heat. In later years, historians and anthropologists studying family journals often commented that frontier women engineered comfort. The phrase has become a quiet tribute to their unrecorded labor. They built warmth not from materials but from imagination. They could turn ashes into salve, rags into quilts, silence into music. The McCarthy father looks up from his work. He says softly that the storm taught him what fire really means. It isn't just flame, he says. It's what she does with her hands. The mother laughs, a short sound that fills the air like a spark. The children smile, though they do not fully understand. Outside, the snow melts a little more. Patches of brown earth appear, steaming faintly in the Sunday. A faint breeze carries the smell of thawing soil, rich and alive. The oxen stomp their hooves, impatient to move again. Life is gathering itself, quietly but surely. A curious piece of folklore collected from rural communities described how women were believed to hold the secret of spring within their homes. Some said that when the first quilt was finished after a storm, the thaw would begin for real. The pattern of stitches symbolized the rhythm of the returning world. Scholars have traced this belief back to old European customs, where domestic work marked the turning of seasons. The McCarthy mother finishes her last repair and folds the patched garments neatly. She places them near the fire to dry, then sits back with a tired smile. Her work looks plain, but each thread glints faintly in the light. It is not beauty, but endurance made visible. Outside, the wind changes. It carries warmth this time. The family gathers near the doorway, watching thin rivulets of water run down the snowbanks. The father wraps an arm around his wife's shoulders. He whispers, "You saved us." She shakes her head. "We all saved each other," she says. The sun dips lower, and the light turns golden again. The world, once frozen and silent, now hums with quiet motion. In that moment, the McCarthys understand that survival is not only about strength or will, it is about invention, tenderness, and the patient work of ordinary hands. The days grow longer. Each sunrise arrives a little earlier, washing the snow in pale gold. The air still carries cold, but it feels thinner now, less cruel. The McCarthys rise before dawn, their breath misting in faint halos. They no longer fear the silence. It has become part of them. In this gentler light, everything they once did by instinct begins to make sense. The father watches the smoke from their new fire spiral straight upward and wonders about its path. The mother tests the warmth of her patched coat and smiles, curious how something so crude could work so well. It is only later, when others come through these lands with instruments and books, that science begins to name what they already knew. Modern researchers studying old survival methods often marvel at how much the pioneers understood without equations. They knew that heat rises, that air moves faster through small spaces, that layers trap warmth. What they practiced out of necessity Physics later explained with precision. The air in the cabin smells of pine and lard, faintly sweet. The father sits near the fire, holding his hands out. The heat, he says softly, feels heavier close to the ground. He has discovered convection without knowing the word. The mother nods. That is why the children sleep on the floor, she replies. Their knowledge is lived, not learned. A curious account from an 1890 field diary describes a homesteader building a bed of dried grass above an iron pot filled with warm stones. He noticed that even when the air was freezing, the grass held a layer of warmth close to the skin. Centuries later, engineers would study this very concept when designing thermal insulation for modern shelters. The old tricks of survival became blueprints for technology. The McCarthys understand warmth through touch. They can feel when the snow walls hold heat too long, or when the vent hole lets in too much cold air. They adjust things without thinking, opening, closing, shifting their bodies slightly to balance the space. In their small world, they have become scientists of breath and temperature. Historians today point out that knowledge like this rarely made it into books. The pioneers did not write theories, they wrote instructions. Keep the vent low for sleeping, one manual advised, and let the breath of beasts warm your air. To modern readers, such advice seems poetic. To the settlers, it was survival logic. The mother watches the thin thread of smoke from their pot rise toward the vent. She notes how it drifts lazily to one side, meaning a draft has entered from a crack in the wall. She pushes snow into the gap with the back of her hand. Instantly, the flame steadies. She smiles. The small adjustments feel like magic, though they are simply the language of observation. A little-known detail from the journals of early explorers tells of people using their own shadows to measure warmth. If a shadow looked crisp and dark against snow, the air was cold enough to freeze water in minutes. If the edges blurred, the temperature had softened. Scientists have since confirmed this visual clue, caused by the refraction of light in warmer air. The settlers who noticed it were practicing early meteorology without knowing it. The McCarthys use similar instincts now. The father glances at the horizon and says, "We'll have a melt by week's end." He can tell by the way the sky turns faintly silver at dusk. The children repeat his words, as if reciting a prophecy. In truth, it is science hidden in poetry. By afternoon, the air inside the cabin grows too warm. The snow walls sweat faintly, droplets running down like tears. The father opens the vent wider, letting in a breath of fresh air. The temperature drops quickly. He grins. "It listens," he says. A modern physicist might describe this as convection control, but to the McCarthys, it feels like conversation with the elements. Their shelter has become an extension of themselves, responsive and alive. A curious letter found in a museum archive records a man comparing his cabin to a living creature. "It breathes with me," he wrote. "When I wake, it sighs." Scholars debate whether this was metaphor or delirium, yet those who have lived through true isolation know the feeling. When nature closes in around you, the boundary between body and world grows thin. As evening comes, the family sits by the fire again. The mother, curious as ever, tests a new idea. She places a pan of water near the door and another near the fire. By morning, she notes, the one near the door will freeze solid, while the other remains liquid. The difference teaches her how heat moves, how to arrange their belongings for the next winter. Knowledge, gathered from simple acts, becomes inheritance. The children fall asleep as their parents whisper about how the fire's glow reflects on the snow outside, casting orange veins through the drifts. The father says it looks like the veins of the earth itself, carrying warmth through its body. The mother nods and rests her head against his shoulder. Science will later describe such beauty with formulas, but tonight it is enough simply to feel it. The family has learned that wisdom does not always come from books or instruments. Sometimes it rises from cold breath and cracked hands, from the way the world answers when you pay attention. The fire burns lower, flickering softly. The air moves gently through the vent, cool against their faces. Outside, The snow glows faintly under the moon. Inside, the lesson settles quietly in their hearts. Warmth, like knowledge, is made, not given. Days pass in a rhythm so slow it feels eternal. The snow thins a little each afternoon, shrinking into uneven patches. Water begins to drip from the edges of the roof, filling small hollows around the cabin. The sound is steady, like the ticking of an unseen clock. The McCarthys have begun to believe they will make it through the season. They do not yet know that their ways of enduring will outlast them. Generations later, people who hike, explore, or live off the grid will borrow the same lessons, though the names will change. The skills that once belonged to desperate settlers will become part of modern survival lore. In the present day, wilderness guides still teach how to dig a snow cave for warmth, how to vent it to breathe, how to keep hands moving to stop frostbite. They may quote scientific principles or display glossy charts, but their knowledge is born from the same instinct the McCarthys used without words. History, even when forgotten, lingers quietly in our habits. Outdoor historians have traced the lineage of many survival techniques directly to these early homesteaders. The snow shelters of the 19th century evolved into modern mountaineering strategies. The use of fat and ash for insulation became the basis for early waterproofing in clothing. Each small discovery, made in fear and fatigue, found new life centuries later as practiced wisdom. The McCarthys could never imagine hikers carrying carbon stoves or explorers wearing synthetic coats lined with down substitutes. Yet, in spirit, those strangers will be walking beside them. When a climber tests wine direction before setting a tent, or when a traveler melts snow in a tin cup, the echo of frontier knowledge hums through the action. A curious account from an Arctic expedition in 1910 mentions that explorers deliberately studied old pioneer journals before venturing north. One leader wrote that he carried a handwritten copy of a woman's diary from Kansas, learning her tricks for melting snow without smoke. Her words saved us, he noted. This quiet inheritance is how history often survives, not in monuments, but in habits. The father, unaware of all this, works to repair a broken sled runner using strips of hide and wire. The mother observes, offering advice about tension and balance. Their conversation is gentle, practical, timeless. Every move they make becomes a future lesson. Historians sometimes ask why people who endured such misery would write about it at all. The answer lies in continuity. They recorded the details so others might not have to suffer the same mistakes. The sharing of hardship became an act of generosity. The mother now sits with her children, teaching them how to tie knots with spare bits of cord. She shows them how each loop can hold weight if tied carefully. You do not pull hard, she says. You pull steady. She might as well be describing survival itself. A letter from a mountain guide written in the early 20th century makes a similar point. The land rewards patience more than strength, he wrote. You can wrestle with a storm and lose, or you can move slowly through it and live. Scholars studying survival psychology often quote this idea, though its essence had already been lived by people like the McCarthys, long before anyone defined it. Outside, the snow glitters again under the Sunday. The oxen shift and snort, shaking frost from their hides. The air is clean and bright. The father pauses his work to look out across the horizon. He tells his family that someday others will come with better tools and easier lives, but even then, they will need courage as much as skill. The mother smiles and says that courage, unlike fire, never burns out completely. Later that afternoon, a neighbor appears on the horizon, trudging slowly through the thinning snow. It is Mr. Olson from the next homestead. His face is pale, but he grins when he sees them. "I heard your lantern," he says. The two men clasp hands in silence for a moment, both understanding what the gesture means. In many settlements, this first visit after a storm marked a turning point. Families would exchange news, offer what food they could, and measure how the land had changed. These encounters became small ceremonies of survival, each handshake carrying the weight of shared endurance. Olsen brings with him a small tin of salt and a story of how his own roof nearly gave way under the snow. The McCarthys share a bit of grain and laughter that feels too large for the small room. The mother serves pine tea, and the men talk quietly about fences, animals, and the strange stillness that follows disaster. A curious observation made by a sociologist studying frontier communities is that hardship tends to strengthen social bonds more than prosperity. He called it the wintering instinct, the tendency of humans to draw closer when the world grows harsh. The records of these early families support his claim. Storms did not simply test people, they stitched them together. As evening falls, the neighbor leaves, his lantern swinging in the dim light. The McCarthys watch until it disappears behind the hill. The world feels wide again, but not empty. The faint tracks in the snow, the scent of smoke lingering in the air, the knowledge that other hearts are still beating nearby, all of it forms a quiet proof that community endures, even in isolation. Inside, the family eats together, the fire steady and calm. The children ask if Mr. Olsen will return tomorrow. The mother says perhaps, though the weather will decide. The father looks into the flame and says softly, "We have learned enough to share." The room falls into peaceful silence. The fire crackles, the oxen shift in their sleep, and outside, the stars return one by one. The world has grown smaller through hardship, yet it feels infinite in meaning. The lessons of this winter will travel farther than any of them can imagine, carried in every small act of kindness and skill passed from one generation to the next. The thaw brings a different kind of silence, softer but uneasy. The snow still gleams in the hollows, yet mud begins to show on the paths, dark and wet. The air smells of damp soil and melting wood. It feels as though the land is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The McCarthys move slowly through this fragile peace, still cautious, still listening. In every community after a long winter, stories begin to shift. What had seemed like survival lessons start turning into myths, and myths turn into warnings. People remember what worked and forget what did not, and out of that mix grow half-truths that can either save or destroy the next generation. One early frontier manual printed in 1885 included a list titled Truths of the Winter Plains. Some of those truths sound wise even now, while others, we know today, were deadly errors. Drink snow to stay alive, it claimed, not realizing that melting snow inside the mouth steals heat faster than hunger. Another line read, Fire cannot burn in deep cold, a misunderstanding of moisture and air pressure that left many families freezing beside unlit hearths. Modern historians often note that misinformation can travel as fast as survival knowledge, even when lives depend on accuracy. The McCarthys have learned by experience which ideas keep them breathing. They melt snow in a pot instead of in their hands. They keep air vents open. They share warmth rather than hoard it. Yet, when neighbors visit, each family brings its own collection of lessons and legends, some helpful, some strange. Mr. Olsen insists that rubbing whiskey on frostbite cures it faster than grease. Another neighbor claims that eating icicles strengthens the lungs. The mother listens politely but does neither. She has seen too much to trust easy answers. Curiously, medical historians have traced many of these beliefs to older European superstitions blended with indigenous wisdom that was only half understood. Some remedies worked, but others were disasters. One record tells of settlers boiling pine needles with kerosene for chest infections, mistaking the mixture for medicine. Experts still discuss how such confusion spread across rural communities with no doctors or consistent teaching. Desperation makes every rumor sound like truth. The McCarthy's children, curious as always, ask their father why people tell things that are not true. He thinks for a long moment, then says, "Because hope talks louder than sense." His wife laughs softly and adds, "And because sometimes it works anyway." There is a kind of poetry in that contradiction. Human beings need stories more than instructions. Even falsehood, if it carries courage, can keep people moving. Yet the border between comfort and danger is thin. Frontier journals are filled with notes about old cures that cost fingers, toes, or lives. One peculiar entry from a Yukon trapper's diary records that during an 1879 storm, he coated his feet in candle wax because someone told him it worked better than boots. He survived, but barely. His account was later published as a warning. Scholars studying folklore often call this process knowledge by mistake. Humanity learns because someone before us failed loudly enough for others to hear. The McCarthys live in that balance now. Each evening they discuss what they will teach their children to remember. The father insists that they must tell the truth about the storm, not make it grander than it was. The mother nods but says that courage always deserves a little beauty. Their compromise becomes a new kind of story, practical and gentle at once. Historians continue to debate whether frontier families valued accuracy or comfort more. Some diaries show careful observation, almost scientific detail. Others dissolve into fable. The argument may never end, yet perhaps both were necessary. Facts keep the body alive. Stories keep the mind from breaking. As twilight falls, the family sits outside the cabin, watching the light fade from gold to grey. The snow reflects the sky's colour, turning the world to pearl. The mother hums the old tune again, and the children join her. When they finish, the father says quietly that someday people will read books about storms like this one, filled with lessons and mistakes. He laughs and adds, "I hope they remember to breathe before believing." A historian centuries later would find those words in a notebook preserved under layers of dust, and he would write about the wisdom of humility. He would say that the greatest gift of the frontier was not invention or bravery, but the ability to doubt what seemed certain. The McCarthys fall silent again. The stars appear one by one, shimmering over the thawing land. The world looks peaceful now, but they know peace is temporary. Winter always returns. Still, they have learned enough to meet it with both reason and reverence. You can almost see them sitting there in the half-light, wrapped in patched coats, faces turned to the sky. They do not speak of miracles, only of what they have seen and what they will teach. The line between myth and truth blurs gently around them, just as snow and sky blend at the horizon. And somewhere in that blur lies the quiet wisdom that keeps people alive when knowledge alone is not enough. By the time spring edges closer, the prairie begins to hum again. The snow that once felt endless now clings only to shaded hollows, turning grey and soft as it melts into the soil. The ground, heavy with thaw, smells rich and raw. It is the scent of renewal, though it comes with reminders of what the winter cost. The McCarthys walk the land slowly, taking stock of what remains. The fence that once circled the small pasture lies scattered in crooked sections. The barn leans slightly where the frost pushed against its foundation. A tree near the creek has split cleanly in two. Yet the family moves without despair. They touch each ruin like an old friend. Each mark in the wood is proof that they were here and that they endured. The father kneels beside the barn wall, running his hand over the cracked boards. He can feel the difference between damage and strength. "We will build it straight again," he says simply. His voice carries more calm than sadness. The mother nods. She has already begun to plan which tasks will come first. Repairing the roof, gathering dry grass for the animals, digging the garden once the frost finally releases its grip. Across the frontier, this quiet rebuilding happened every spring. Letters from the time describe it with the same steady tone. No celebration, no mourning, only work. One woman wrote, "We patch what the storm taught us to value." Historians often quote her as the perfect expression of resilience. It was not triumph, but continuity that mattered most. The children follow their parents, dragging sticks through the softening ground to trace new borders. Their laughter rises and fades with the wind. The oxen plod nearby, patient and sure-footed, as if they too are grateful for the Sunday. In the distance, the sound of running water fills the air, the first stream breaking through its icy prison. The sound is brighter than any music. A curious detail recorded in a settler's journal tells how families would listen for the first creek song each year. They believed it marked the end of winter's rule. Modern hydrologists might smile at the phrasing, but they too listen for that shift, the moment when the ice turns liquid and begins to move again. Nature's own clock. The McCarthys pause beside that sound now, watching the water shimmer and twist beneath thin layers of melting ice. The youngest child drops a pebble into the flow and claps when it vanishes downstream. Life moves again, and so must they. That night, they build their first true fire since the storm began. The wood hisses at first, damp from the thaw, then catches in a steady flame. The light fills the cabin, painting the walls gold. The smoke rises clean and straight through the vent. The air smells of resin and sap, warm and alive. The family sits close, faces glowing in the soft light. The father stares into the flame for a long time before speaking. "It feels strange," he says. "We lived so long without it." The mother nods and answers, "Maybe the cold taught us how to see fire again." Her words hold more truth than they realize. Every person who has endured deep winter carries a different kind of sight afterward. The world no longer feels given but earned. Historians studying pioneer diaries often note this shift in tone from before and after great storms. The language changes from ownership to gratitude. People stopped writing about what they had and began writing about what they were allowed to keep. The McCarthys eat a small meal beside the fire grain, milk, and a bit of salt traded from their neighbor. It tastes simple and perfect. The warmth on their faces feels almost unfamiliar. The children sit quietly, not from fatigue but from awe. The flame flickers in their eyes like sunlight caught in glass. Outside, the last patches of snow glow faintly under the moon. The land that once buried them now glistens like a sea of light. The family steps out for a moment before sleep, breathing in the cold night air. They look up at the stars, remembering the nights when they could only imagine them beyond the storm. The father speaks softly, as though afraid to break the calm. "The storm is gone, but I can still hear it sometimes." The mother nods. "It will always speak," she says, "but we know how to answer now." Scholars who have studied survivor accounts often mention this lingering awareness, the sense that hardship becomes a presence one carries forward. It does not haunt so much as remind. In time, it turns from fear into wisdom. The McCarthys do not need words like trauma or endurance to describe it. For them, it is simply part of living. The fire crackles behind them, warm and steady. The sound of running water joins it, blending into a music the family will remember for the rest of their lives. You can almost feel it, the mix of heat and chill, the smell of thawing earth, the weight of silence slowly giving way to motion. They return inside, their steps slow and peaceful. The children fall asleep first, their faces soft in the firelight. The parents sit together a while longer, holding hands without speaking. Outside, the stars shimmer across the melting world. Inside, the air is filled with the quiet promise of seasons yet to come. The days lengthen until time itself feels stretched. Morning light slips through the cracks in the cabin walls, turning everything gold. The air carries the scent of wet earth, of ash, and of something faintly sweet, the smell of new growth hiding under the last crusts of snow. The storm that once ruled their world has become a memory that hums quietly beneath everything the McCarthys do. They have begun to rebuild in earnest now. The father replaces the fence posts, his hammer striking in slow, even rhythm. The sound carries across the still fields like a heartbeat. The mother turns the soil behind the cabin, her hands deep in the thawing ground. Each scoop of earth feels like a small resurrection. The children help by fetching bits of wood and collecting smooth stones from the creek. Every movement is ordinary, but together they form a kind of hymn to survival. In the evenings, they sit by the fire and talk about what the storm taught them. The father says he has learned patience, that sometimes the earth must be silent before it grows again. The mother smiles and says she has learned that warmth is something made, not found. The children listen and add their own wisdom, that snow can sound alive, that stars can shine even through clouds, and that stories make the dark smaller. Across the frontier, Similar reflections were written in letters and diaries once spring arrived. People spoke of humility, of gratitude, and of the strange beauty that hardship left behind. One farmer in Wisconsin wrote that the blizzard had emptied the heart and filled it again with something simpler. Scholars later quoted his words as the essence of resilience, though he meant only to describe how the world looked after a storm. The McCarthys have learned to see beauty even in scars. The barn leans a little still, the roof patched unevenly, but they love it more than before. The fields lie bare, yet every inch carries the memory of snow melting into promise. When the wind moves through the grass, it sounds almost like breathing. The father teaches the children how to read the land again, the shape of the horizon, the tilt of clouds, the direction of the breeze. Never stop listening, he says. The sky always tells you what is coming. His words hold the same weight that once belonged to the whispers of their ancestors, who also looked upward to understand survival. The mother sits nearby, sewing a new quilt from scraps of old clothes and bits of linen saved from before the storm. Each square holds a story, the blue from the father's work shirt, the red from a child's old scarf, the faded brown from a blanket that once covered them during the worst night. When she finishes, she spreads it across their bed. The pattern is uneven but radiant. It smells faintly of smoke and pine resin. Historians studying such quilts have found them to be both art and record maps of endurance stitched into fabric. Some even include small embroidered symbols to mark storms, births, and journeys. The McCarthy mother does not add words, but she knows that every stitch speaks for itself. As dusk deepens, the family eats their supper of bread, milk, and wild onions gathered near the creek. The fire glows steady, the room wrapped in warmth. The youngest child asks what will happen next winter. The father looks into the flame before answering. We will be ready, he says, but even if we are not, we will remember how to wait. The mother adds softly, and how to hope. The storm has changed them, but not in the way disasters often do. It has not made them harder. It has made them slower, steadier, more attuned to small miracles. They no longer see cold as an enemy, but as a teacher that leaves lessons carved in ice. When night comes, they step outside to look at the sky. The stars are bright and countless, reflected in the patches of melting snow like scattered lanterns. The world feels infinite again. The children breathe deeply, their laughter carried gently on the warming breeze. The father closes his eyes and listens to the faint creak of trees, the slow trickle of thaw, the quiet rhythm of life resuming. He realizes that the sound of the storm still lives somewhere inside him, not as fear, but as reminder. The earth is vast, and so is the will to survive within it. The family returns inside. The fire crackles softly, the quilt glows in the amber light, and sleep comes easily. Outside, the snow melts into streams, carrying the memory of winter down to the rivers, into the sea, and onward to places they will never see. Yet in each droplet, the story of their endurance travels on. Now that the storm has faded, let your breathing slow. Picture the last of the snow turning to water, gliding softly over dark soil. The world that was once white and cold begins to shimmer with color again. The air smells clean, like pine and smoke, and you can almost hear distant laughter carried on the wind. You have walked beside these people through their hardest days, through hunger, silence, and the endless cold. You have watched them discover warmth in breath, in song, in the small touch of one hand against another. What they found in the snow is what every heart already knows, that even in the worst winter, life waits quietly for the light. Let your mind rest in that stillness. The cabin's fire burns low now, its glow soft and steady. Outside, the stars linger over the thawing fields. Each one shines like a tiny memory, a spark of everything that has been endured. The McCarthys sleep, their faces peaceful, their story complete. The storm no longer threatens. It has become a teacher whose voice fades gently with the wind. The earth breathes again, and so do you. Take one last slow breath in. Hold it, and let it go. Feel the warmth you have gathered remain with you, a quiet ember behind your ribs. Tomorrow will come bright and soft, and the snow will be gone. For now, rest. The world is safe, the night is calm, and the story has ended in light. Sweet dreams.